Hello everyone, and welcome back to X-Ranger. Before we begin, I thought it would be interesting if each of you could leave a comment indicating which part of the world you're joining us from. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe if you're enjoying the episodes. Now let's get comfortable, relax, and start our program. So I've never really told this to anyone before, not in full detail, because honestly, most people would just laugh or call me crazy. But it's been eating at me for years, and I figure if I'm ever going to get it off my chest, it might as well be here, where others might understand. This happened back when I was in my late 20s, during a solo mule deer hunt up in the high country of Ferry County, Washington. I'd been hunting since I was a kid, taught by my dad, and I was pretty comfortable being out in the wilderness alone. But this trip, this one changed everything for me. It was one of those crisp fall days where the air feels thin and clean, and the sky is so blue it almost hurts to look at. I'd packed light, just my rifle, a small tent, some food, and enough supplies to last a few days. My plan was to set up camp somewhere with a good view of the Sherman Creek drainage, where I'd spotted deer signed the year before. The hike in was tough. The terrain is steep and rugged, with thick stands of pine and fir trees that seem to go on forever. By the time I found a spot to camp, the sun was starting to dip behind the mountains, casting long shadows that made the forest feel even deeper and more isolated. I picked a small clearing on a ridge overlooking the drainage. It was maybe a couple 100 yards across, with a few scattered boulders and a patch of grass that was soft underfoot. I remember thinking how peaceful it was, just the sound of the wind rustling the trees and the occasional call of a bird settling in for the night. I got to work setting up my tent, making sure it was secure because the weather can turn fast up there. Then I gathered some dry wood for a fire, but I decided to hold off on lighting it until later. I didn't want to spook any deer that might be moving through at dusk. As evening fell, the temperature dropped quickly. I pulled on an extra layer and sat on a log near my tent, just taking it all in. The silence out there is something else. It's not really silence, but a low hum of life that you only notice when you stop and listen. I could hear the creek way down below, a faint gurgling sound, and now and then the snap of a twig or the rustle of leaves that made me glance around, hoping it was a deer. But mostly, it was just the wind. I remember feeling pretty content, like I was exactly where I was supposed to be. That didn't last long. It must have been around an hour after sunset, when the last light had faded and the stars were starting to poke through the sky. I was just about to light my fire when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the wind. Sometimes it can sound almost human when it whips through the valleys. But this was different. It came from down in the drainage, a long, drawn-out howl that seemed to rise and fall in a way I'd never heard before. It wasn't like a coyote or a wolf. Those sounds I know well. Coyotes have that yipping, chaotic quality, and wolves have a deeper, more mournful howl that carries for miles. This was stranger. It lasted for what felt like 10 seconds, maybe a bit more. And it had this weird, undulating quality, like it was coming from something with lungs bigger than any animal I'd ever encountered. The sound hit me like a physical blow. I froze right where I was, my hand halfway to the matches. Every hair on my arms and the back of my neck stood straight up, and a cold shiver ran down my spine. I held my breath, listening, and sure enough, it came again. Exactly the same, that same rising and falling howl, lasting another 10 seconds or so. Then, after a pause, it repeated a third time. 3 times total. Each one sent another wave of chills through me. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat, and my palms were slick with sweat. I've been scared in the woods before. Once when I stumbled across a bear, another time in a lightning storm, but this was different. This was a deep, primal fear that made my stomach twist into knots. I stayed frozen for what felt like ages, just listening. The howl didn't come again, but the silence that followed was almost worse. It was too quiet, like everything in the forest had gone still because of that sound. No wind, no birds, nothing. I slowly stood up, my legs feeling shaky, and I grabbed my rifle. I didn't even think about it. It was just instinct. I scanned the trees down toward the drainage, but it was pitch black down there now, with only the faint outline of the ridges against the sky. I couldn't see anything, but I felt like I was being watched. That's the thing that gets me. The feeling that something was out there, and it knew exactly where I was. I decided not to light the fire. Suddenly, the idea of having a bright, crackling flame felt like shouting my location to whatever had made that noise. Instead, I crawled into my tent and zipped it up, but I left the flap open a crack so I could peer out. I sat there with my rifle across my lap, listening to every little sound. Every rustle of leaves, every creak of a branch made me jump. My mind started racing, trying to place what it could have been. A bear? No, bears don't howl like that. A mountain lion. They scream sometimes, but this wasn't a scream. It was a howl, deep and sustained. Maybe some weird echo or a trick of the wind, but it was too consistent, too deliberate. Time dragged on. I checked my watch. It was only around 9 o'clock, but it felt like midnight. The darkness pressed in on me, and I kept imagining shapes moving between the trees. At one point, I heard what sounded like heavy footsteps crunching on dry leaves somewhere off to my left. I held my breath, straining to hear, but it stopped after a few seconds. Was it an animal? Probably. But in that state, everything felt threatening. I remember my muscles were so tense that my shoulders started to ache, and I had to consciously remind myself to breathe slowly. I tried to reason with myself. I'm a practical guy. I work in construction, I fix things, I don't believe in ghosts or monsters, but out there alone in the dark, all that logic went out the window. That howl, it wasn't natural. It had the intelligence to it, like it was communicating something, but I had no idea what. I thought about packing up and hiking out right then, but it was too dangerous. The trail was rough, and without a light, I'd likely twist an ankle or worse. So I stayed put, praying for morning to come. The night seemed to last forever. I must have dozed off a couple of times, but each time I jolted awake at the smallest noise. Once I heard a distant crack, like a thick branch breaking, and my heart leaped into my throat. Another time, there was a low grunting sound that seemed to come from closer by, but it didn't repeat. I kept my rifle ready, my finger near the trigger, even though I knew I probably wouldn't shoot unless I saw something clearly. But what would I see? Some big dark shape. My mind went to stories I'd heard growing up about Sasquatch or other wild men of the woods. I'd always dismissed them as campfire tales, but now I wasn't so sure. Around what I guessed was 3 or 4 in the morning, I heard something else, a series of knocks, like someone hitting a tree with a stick. 3 knocks, then a pause, then 3 more. It was coming from the same direction as the howl earlier. I've spent enough time in the woods to know that woodpeckers can make knocking sounds, but this was too rhythmic, too spaced out. It sounded intentional. I felt a fresh wave of fear wash over me, and I remember squeezing my eyes shut for a second, like if I couldn't see it, it might not be real, but it was real. The knock stopped after a few minutes, and silence fell again. I didn't sleep at all after that. I just sat there, watching the darkness through the tent flap, waiting for the sky to lighten. When the first hints of dawn finally appeared, a pale grey light seeping through the trees, I felt a huge rush of relief. I packed up my gear as quickly as I could, my hands trembling the whole time. I didn't even bother with breakfast. I just wanted to get out of there. As I hiked back down the trail, the forest started to wake up, birds chirping, squirrels chattering, and it should have felt normal, but it didn't. Every shadow made me jump, and I kept looking over my shoulder, half expecting to see something following me. I made it back to my truck by mid-morning, and I didn't stop driving until I was well out of the mountains. For the rest of that hunt, I was on edge, but I never went back to that spot. I told myself I'd had a bad scare, that it was probably just a weird animal sound amplified by the terrain. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. That howl stuck with me, haunting my dreams for years. I'd be lying in bed at home, and sometimes I'd hear a similar sound in the wind, and my heart would race all over again. It wasn't until years later, when I was living in Southeast Alaska and on a brown bear hunt with my father-in-law, that I finally mentioned it. We were sitting around a campfire one night, and the subject of strange woods noises came up. I told him about that day in Ferry County, and to my surprise, he didn't laugh. He got real quiet. Then he shared his own story from nearly the same area, a similar howl, same time of year, that had scared him so bad he cut his trip short. Hearing that from someone else, someone I respected, made it all feel more real. It reinforced that belief I'd been fighting, that there are things out there in the wilderness we don't understand, creatures that stay hidden, but make their presence known in ways that leave you terrified and questioning everything you thought you knew. Even now, all these years later, I can still hear that howl clear as day, and it sends chills down my spine every time I think about it. I'll never forget that night, and I'll never have an explanation for what it was. Story 2. It was one of those clear Idaho mornings where the sky looks like it's been washed clean and the sun feels warm, but not heavy yet. I'd just finished babysitting for the Henderson kids over in Sagal, and I was heading home in my old Ford Expedition. I call it an expedition vehicle, but really, it's just a beat-up SUV I've had for years, reliable as an old dog. It was around 11 in the morning. I remember that specifically because I just glanced at the clock on the dash, thinking I'd be home in time to get some laundry done before lunch. The road I was on is one of those back roads, the kind that cuts through patches of forest and open fields, not another house in sight for long stretches. It was just me, the rumble of the engine, and the dust kicking up behind me. I had the window down a crack, and the air smelled like pine and dry earth. I was just driving, my mind kind of empty, just floating on the monotony of the drive. I was maybe 5-10 minutes from my turn-off, and then it happened. Something bolted out of the trees on my right and ran across the road right in front of my bumper. I mean, it was right there. I didn't even have time to hit the brakes. My foot just slammed down on the pedal out of pure instinct. But it was already past me. The whole thing took 2, maybe 3 seconds, from the moment I saw the movement to the moment it disappeared into the thick brush on the left side of the road. My first thought, the one that flashed in my head before my brain could even process what my eyes were seeing, was cat, a big one, a mountain lion. We have them around here. You see them sometimes, or at least you see the signs of them. But this was different. It wasn't the lanky, slender shape of a cougar. This thing was built like a tank, heavy, dense. Its shoulders were massive and hunched with power. It was low to the ground, but still tall. Its back was level with the top of my bumper. I drive a Ford Expedition, so you can picture the height. This thing was easily 3.5, maybe 4 feet tall at the shoulder. It moved in this powerful ground-eating lope, not a run so much as a surge. Its legs were thick, like tree trunks, and they pistoned it across the gravel in just a few huge strides. But the color, that's what really froze the blood in my veins. The sun was high, and it hit the creature square on as it crossed the open space of the road. For that one split second, it was illuminated. Its coat wasn't a solid color. It was this deep, rich maroon, like old wine or dried blood, and shot through with black, and it shimmered. I don't know how else to describe it. It had a pattern, a rosette pattern, like a leopard's spots, but the base color was that unbelievable red. The light caught the different textures of its fur, making the pattern stand out for a breathtaking, terrifying instant. It wasn't a flat color. It was alive, shimmering with this hidden, wild design. Its head was blocky, not sleek like a cat's. It was broad, with a powerful jaw, and it didn't turn to look at me. It just focused on getting across the road, its entire body a single purpose of motion. Then it was gone. It vanished into the wall of bushes and young pines on the other side without a sound. No crack of a branch, no rustle of leaves. It just dissolved into the shadows. My heart was trying to beat its way out of my chest. I could feel it hammering against my ribs, a frantic, panicked rhythm. My hands were locked on the steering wheel, my knuckles white. I'd come to a complete stop, the SUV idling roughly in the middle of the road. Dust settled around me, sparkling in the sunbeams. I just sat there. I couldn't move. I stared at the spot where it had disappeared, my eyes trying to pierce the darkness between the trees. Nothing. There was nothing there. It was as if it had never been. But I had seen it. I was 10 feet away. I saw the texture of its coat, the individual muscles rippling under its skin as it moved, the thickness of its legs, the sheer, unbelievable bulk of it. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't my imagination. This was a physical thing, a solid, breathing, living creature that had just crossed my path. My mouth was dry. I could feel a cold sweat beading on my forehead and under my arms. I slowly, carefully lifted my foot off the brake and let the truck roll forward a few feet, pulling it over to the shoulder on the right side, the side it had come from. I put it in park and just listened. The engine ticked as it cooled. A bird chirped somewhere far off. The wind whispered through the tops of the pines. Normal sounds, peaceful sounds. But to me, they felt like a lie. The forest had just shown me a secret, a deep, dark one. And now it was pretending everything was fine. I got out of the truck. My legs felt shaky, like they were made of jelly. The gravel crunched under my boots, the sound unnaturally loud in the silence. I walked to the front of the truck, to the spot where it had crossed. I could still see the faint disturbance in the gravel, a scuff mark from its powerful feet. I knelt down, my knees protesting, my heart still going 1,000,000 miles an hour. I looked at the tracks. They weren't clear, just broken impressions in the loose stone, but they were big, roundish. Nothing like the paw print of a deer or an elk, and definitely not the neat four-toed print of a mountain lion. This was something else. I stood up and looked into the woods where it had come from. The undergrowth was thick, a tangle of huckleberry bushes and fallen logs. I tried to picture something that big and heavy moving through that without making a sound. It seemed impossible. Then I looked across the road to where it had gone. The bushes were thick there too, a solid wall of green. I took a few steps toward it, my breath catching in my throat. I was afraid, genuinely, deeply afraid. What if it was still there, just inside the tree line, watching me? The thought made the hair on my arms stand up. I felt exposed, standing there in the open road. I forced myself to walk to the edge of the bushes. I peered in, squinting, trying to see past the first few feet of shadows. It was dark and cool in there, a different world. I couldn't see more than 10 feet in. There was no sign of it, no broken branches, no path. It had just vanished. That was almost worse. If there had been a trail, a sign of its passage, it would have felt more real, more grounded. This complete and total disappearance made it feel like a ghost, a solid, muscular, 4-foot-tall ghost with a maroon and black coat. I got back in my truck, my hands still trembling. I locked the doors. The thunk of the locks engaging was a small, pathetic comfort. I sat there for another 5 minutes, just staring at the woods, waiting for something, anything, to happen. Nothing did. The rest of the drive home was a blur. My eyes kept darting to the woods on either side of the road, searching the shadows for any flicker of movement. Every stump, every dark patch of ferns looked like it could be the creature coiled and ready to spring. I've driven that road 1,000 times. It never felt menacing before. That day, it felt like a tunnel through a place I didn't know anymore. When I got home, I practically ran from my truck to the front door, fumbling with my keys, my back to the tree line that borders my property. I got inside, slammed the door shut, and leaned against it, breathing hard. My safe, familiar living room felt different. The windows felt like vulnerabilities. Later that afternoon, I tried to tell people. I called my sister first. I was still rattled, my voice probably sounded a little shrill. I told her what I saw, describing the color, the size, the pattern. She laughed. Not a mean laugh, but the kind of laugh you use when someone says something silly. Shannon. It was probably just a big house cat, she said. You know, the sun can do funny things. It was probably a tabby, and the light made the colors look weird. A house cat, a tabby. I felt a hot flush of frustration. It was 4 feet tall at the shoulder, I insisted. Perspective, Sean. It was close to your car, it just looked big. I got off the phone feeling deflated. I tried a friend, got a similar response. Maybe it was a lynx. They can look pretty big. But I've seen lynx. This was no lynx. The proportions were all wrong. The color was impossible. That's the thing that sticks with me, the thing that keeps me up some nights. It wasn't just the sight of it, as terrifying as that was. It was the dismissal, the way people who know me, who know I'm not a hysterical person, just shrugged and offered a simple, safe, normal explanation. They wanted to put what I saw into a box labeled things we understand. But it doesn't fit. It will never fit. I saw what I saw. The deep maroon and black, shimmering in the Idaho sun. The rosette pattern that wasn't meant for these woods. The sheer, impossible bulk of it, moving with a grace that belied its size. It was real. It was there. And then it was gone, leaving me with nothing but the memory, a cold knot of fear in my stomach, and the absolute unshakable certainty that I had seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. Something that walked out of a hidden world and back into it, leaving me alone on a sunny road, forever shaken. Story 3. It all started one winter day. I must have been 13. The air was so cold it felt like it was biting any exposed skin. I was up in my grandparents' house, bored out of my mind. I found some of my grandpa's old World War II gear in a closet. His old helmet, a canteen, a belt. I decided to play soldier. I bundled up in about 100 layers, put on the helmet, which was way too big and kept sliding over my eyes, and I went outside onto the back deck. The deck overlooked this steep hill that led down into the woods. Everything was grey and white. The trees bare, the ground covered in a patchy, dirty snow. I had this pair of binoculars with me. Just cheap ones, but they worked okay. I was scanning the tree line, pretending I was on a reconnaissance mission. I remember my fingers were going numb, even through my gloves. I was panning slowly across the woods, from left to right, not really expecting to see anything but squirrels or maybe a deer. Then I saw it. About 70 yards away, just inside the tree line, there was something standing there. It was tall, really tall, and it was just still. It wasn't a tree. Trees don't have that shape. I adjusted the focus on the binoculars, my breath making little clouds in front of the lenses. It was a figure, a huge, dark figure, but with this reddish-orange tint to it, like old rust or wet clay. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't shaggy like a bear. It was more like a thick, matted coat. I couldn't see its face clearly from that distance, but I got the impression of a heavy brow, and it was just standing there, perfectly motionless, facing me. My first thought wasn't even fear, it was just confusion. My brain was trying to file it under deer or weird stump, but it wouldn't fit. It was too upright, too deliberate. We just stared at each other. I had the binoculars glued to my face, and I could feel my heart starting to thump hard in my chest. This went on for what felt like forever, but was probably only a minute, a full minute of just staring at this thing and it staring right back at me. There was no aggression in its posture, no movement at all. It was just watching. The feeling was indescribable. It was like being pinned, like I was the subject of some intense, silent study. My nose started to itch. I know of all the things, right? But it did. I had to sneeze. I lowered the binoculars for just a second, just a quick swipe of my glove under my nose, and I looked back up. It was gone, just gone. No movement, no sound, no rustling branches. 1 second it was there, a massive, undeniable presence, and the next, the space between the trees was empty. I scanned the area frantically with the binoculars, but there was nothing. No sign it had ever been there. A cold feeling, deeper than the winter chill, settled in my gut. I didn't tell my grandparents. What would I even say? I saw a big hairy thing in the woods. They'd think I had an overactive imagination, so I just kept it to myself. But that image was burned into my brain. A few months later, it was spring. The snow had melted, and everything was turning green and muddy. A friend of mine was over, and I convinced him we should go for a walk in the woods. I hadn't told him about what I'd seen. I think a part of me wanted to prove to myself that it had just been a trick of the light, my mind playing games. We started down the hill into the woods. It was a beautiful day, sunny and warm, but the deeper we went, the more the feeling changed. The woods got thicker, the canopy closing overhead so it felt like twilight, even though it was the middle of the day. We were just talking, joking around, but then we both got quiet at the same time. It's hard to explain the feeling of being watched. It's a physical sensation. The hair on your arms and the back of your neck stands up. You get this prickly feeling all over your skin, like static electricity. You find yourself turning around constantly, scanning the shadows, but you never see anything. We both felt it. We didn't even have to say it to each other. We just started walking a little closer together, our conversation dying out. We were in the densest part of the woods, where the undergrowth was a wall of green. My friend stopped dead in his tracks and grabbed my arm. He pointed, his hand shaking. I followed his gaze. Maybe 50 feet away, half hidden behind a cluster of saplings, was the same figure. Tall, dark, and hairy. It was just lurking there, partially obscured. It wasn't moving. It was just watching us. The same feeling from the winter came rushing back, that intense, focused observation. This time, it was closer, close enough that I could see its size more clearly. It was massive, way bigger than a man. We didn't wait. We didn't say a word. We just turned and started walking back the way we came, trying not to run, trying to be calm. But with every step, I could feel eyes on my back. It was the longest walk of my life. Every crack of a twig made us jump. We were both breathing heavily, our hearts pounding. We didn't stop or look back until we were out of the woods and halfway up the hill to the house. When we finally turned around, the forest was just a forest again, quiet and still. But we both knew what we'd seen. That summer, things got weirder. My friend and I were obsessed, scared, but obsessed. We started going on what we called airsoft patrols. We'd take our airsoft guns and walk the trails, pretending we were investigating. It felt like we were taking back some control, even though we were just kids with plastic guns. One day, it was drizzling rain. Everything was wet and slick, the leaves dripping, the ground soft. We were walking single file on a narrow trail when my friend in front stopped and held up a closed fist like he'd seen soldiers do in movies. He pointed at the trail ahead. There, pressed deep into the mud, was a single footprint. It wasn't a bear print. Bears have claws, and this one didn't. It was a bear footprint, but it was enormous. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was probably 13, maybe 15 inches long. The toes were distinct, and the arch was clearly defined. It was sunk deep into the mud, like whatever made it was incredibly heavy. We just stared at it. My mouth went dry. This was proof, tangible proof. That's when we heard the crash. It was deafening. It came from our right, from a thick tangle of brush and young trees. It wasn't the sound of a falling branch. It was the sound of something huge plowing through the undergrowth, snapping saplings like they were toothpicks. The ground literally shook under our feet. I felt the vibration through the soles of my shoes. Then we heard the footsteps, heavy, crunching bipedal footsteps. Thump, crunch, thump, crunch. They were moving fast, parallel to the trail, staying just inside the cover of the brush. We didn't think, we just ran. We dropped our airsoft guns and we ran for our lives. I've never run so fast in my life. The sound of those crashing, thumping steps stayed right with us, keeping pace just out of sight. Branches whipped at our faces and arms. I slipped in the mud, scrambled back up, and kept running. I didn't look back. We burst out of the tree line at the bottom of the hill and didn't stop sprinting until we were on the back deck, gasping for air, covered in mud and scrapes. We stood there, bent over, hands on our knees, listening. The woods were silent again, but we knew it was still in there. After that, the encounters became more interactive. We'd hear wood knocks, the sound of a thick branch or a log being hit against a tree. One time, out of a stupid mix of bravery and fear, I picked up a thick stick and hit a tree trunk twice. Knock, knock. A few seconds later, from deep within the woods, came an answer. Knock, knock. It was identical. The same spacing, the same tone. My blood ran cold. It felt like a conversation I didn't understand the language of. We tried it a few more times over the weeks, and almost every time, we'd get an answer from deeper in. It was never an echo. It was a response. We started finding other things. One day we found a line of young trees, all about 4 inches in diameter, that had been snapped off about 7 feet up. They were all broken in the same direction, lined up perfectly, like a fence. It wasn't storm damage. Storms don't break trees in a straight, deliberate line. The worst thing we found was a shelter. We were way off the main trails, in a part of the woods I'd never been to before. We came into a small clearing, and in the center was this structure. It wasn't man-made. It was made of large, live saplings that had been bent over and woven together at the top, creating a dome-like shape. It was big enough for something very large to get inside. It was incredibly well made, and it felt ancient. But the feeling that came over us in that clearing was pure dread. It was a heavy, suffocating feeling, like the air itself was pressing down on us. It felt wrong. It felt like we were somewhere we were absolutely not supposed to be. We didn't say a word to each other. We just turned around and got out of there as fast as we could. The moment we left that clearing, the oppressive feeling lifted, like walking out of a cold, dark room into the warm sun. The final time I went into those woods with the intention of finding something was later that year in the winter. There was a fresh layer of snow on the ground, perfect for tracking. I went with a different friend, a guy who was a few years older and had some hunting experience. We thought we were being smart. We brought walkie-talkies so we could split up and cover more ground, staying in contact. The plan was to flank a small valley. I stayed on one ridge. He went down into the valley and up the other side. The woods were dead silent, eerily silent. No birds, no squirrels, nothing. Just the crunch of our own boots in the snow. I was on my ridge, scanning the opposite tree line with my binoculars, when I heard my friend's voice, hushed and tense, crackle over the walkie-talkie. "Hey, you moving?" "No," I whispered back. I'm still. I hear footsteps, big ones, crunching in the snow. They're right between us. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature. I strained my ears, and sure enough, I could hear it too. Crunch, crunch, crunch. Heavy, deliberate steps moving through the valley below, right in the no-man's land between my position and my friends. The sound was clear in the frozen air. "I hear it," I said into the radio, my voice shaky. We both stayed perfectly still, listening to those footsteps walk back and forth down there. We couldn't see a thing. The trees were too thick, but we could hear it perfectly. It was toying with us. It knew exactly where we both were. The feeling wasn't just fear this time. It was a deep, primal understanding of being prey. We were being hunted, or at the very least, herded. After a few minutes of this, my friend's voice came over the radio again, firm and final. "I'm done. I'm coming to you. We're leaving." He didn't have to tell me twice. We met up and got out of there without another word. We didn't run, but we walked fast, and we didn't look back. That was the last time I ever went into those woods with the purpose of seeking it out. I was done. The terror of those crashing sounds, the feeling of being watched, the sheer size of the footprints, it all haunted me. The woods were logged a few years later, the big machines coming in and tearing everything down. I never went back. I'm convinced that thing, whatever it was, a Sasquatch or something else, was using that area as a feeding ground. There were always a lot of deer in there. It was its territory, and we were just dumb kids who stumbled into it. To this day, I can't explain what it was. I just know what I saw, what I heard, and what I felt. And I know that sometimes the woods are not empty. Story 4. It was one of those late November days up in northern Montana where the cold just seeps into your bones and doesn't let go. I'd been out since before sunrise, hoping to get a deer, but I hadn't seen a thing all day. Not a squirrel, not a bird, nothing. The woods were dead quiet, the kind of quiet that feels heavy, like it's pressing down on you. I remember thinking it was weird, but you get used to strange feelings when you're out there alone. My cabin is way off the grid, a solid 6-mile hike from the nearest dirt road, and I like it that way, or I used to. I got back to the cabin right as the sun was dipping below the trees, that last bit of orange light making the snow look like it was on fire. I was tired, my feet were numb, and I was pretty frustrated about coming back empty-handed. The first thing I did was get a fire going in the old wood stove. The cabin is just one room, maybe 15 by 20 feet, with a bed in one corner, a small kitchen area, and a table by the window. It's rustic, but it's mine. I built most of it myself over a few summers. After I got the fire crackling, I heated up some canned stew on the propane camp stove. I remember eating it straight from the pot, standing over the sink, too tired to even sit down. The cabin was warming up, and the smell of pine smoke and beef stew was familiar and comforting. I washed it down with a beer I'd left on the porch to stay cold, then settled into my old armchair by the stove with a book. For a little while, everything felt normal. It was just me, the fire, and the silence. But then the silence started to feel different. It's hard to explain, but if you've spent enough time alone in the wild, you learn to listen to the silence. It's not really silent. It's full of tiny sounds. The creak of a tree in the wind, the scuffle of a mouse under the floorboards, the hiss of the snow settling. All those little noises stopped. It was like someone had thrown a soundproof blanket over the whole cabin. I lowered my book and just listened. Nothing. My skin started to prickle, the hairs on my arms standing up. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, maybe a storm coming in, but the air didn't feel like a storm. It felt still, too still. Then I heard the first sound. It was a soft crunch in the snow outside, like someone taking a careful step. My heart immediately jumped into my throat. Bear, I thought. It had to be a bear. A grizzly sniffing around, maybe attracted by the smell of my dinner. I put my book down slowly, my movements careful and quiet. I stood up from the chair, the old floorboards groaning under my weight, and the sound seemed incredibly loud in the new quiet. I crept over to the corner where I kept my rifle, a .30-06 Springfield. It was loaded, a round already in the chamber. My hands were a little shaky as I picked it up. The wood of the stock felt cold and familiar. I moved to the front window, which looks out toward the tree line. The glass was old and a little wavy, and frost was already starting to form around the edges. I didn't turn on my battery-powered lantern. The fire was giving off enough flickering light to see by inside, but from outside, I'd just be a target in a fishbowl. I peered out into the darkness. The moon wasn't up yet, and with the snow on the ground, the world was a landscape of deep blues and black shadows. I couldn't see anything moving. I stood there for what felt like 10 minutes, just staring, my breath fogging slightly on the cold glass, my finger resting alongside the trigger guard. Another crunch, closer this time, right off to the side of the cabin near the woodpile. It wasn't the heavy, clumsy sound of a bear. It was more deliberate. A step, then a pause. Then another step. Something was walking around my cabin, circling it. My mouth went dry. This wasn't bear behavior. A bear might amble up, maybe stand on its hind legs to look in, but it wouldn't be this cautious. This was different. This felt intelligent. I could feel the weight of its presence, a pressure in the air that made it hard to breathe. I tightened my grip on the rifle, the checkering on the stock pressing into my palm. I decided I needed to get a better look. There's a smaller window on the side of the cabin, right next to my bed. Maybe from there I could see what was near the woodpile. I took a step away from the front window, my boots whispering on the wooden floor. That's when I heard a low, guttural breathing sound right outside the wall. It was a deep, wet, rhythmic sound, like something with a huge chest was inhaling and exhaling slowly. It was so close. I froze, my blood turning to ice in my veins. That wasn't a bear. I've heard bears huff and puff. This was lower, more resonant. It was the sound of something very, very big. I forced my legs to move, creeping toward the side window. The fire cast long, dancing shadows that made everything in the room seem like it was moving. My own shadow loomed huge and distorted on the far wall. I kept my back to the log wall, inching my way along, trying to be silent. The breathing sound kept pace with me on the other side of the logs. It knew where I was. When I got to the side window, I pressed myself against the wall next to it, my heart hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it would crack. I took a deep, silent breath, trying to steady myself. Then I slowly leaned forward, just enough to peek out the corner of the window, and I saw it. The terror of that moment is something I can still feel in my guts. Its face was pressed right against the glass. I mean, its whole massive head was there, flattening its nose and lips against the pane. The glass was fogging with its breath, two plumes of white vapor forming and disappearing with each exhale. The skin was dark, almost black, and covered in a coarse, matted, brownish-black hair. But it was the eyes that I will never, ever forget. They were a light, intelligent brown, and they were reflecting the flickering orange light from my fire. They weren't the dumb, simple eyes of an animal. They were looking in, looking at me. They were full of a strange, ancient curiosity and something else, a kind of primal intensity that felt like a physical blow. We stared at each other for what was probably only 2 or 3 seconds, but it felt like an hour. My brain just short-circuited. Every thought, every instinct just evaporated into pure, undiluted fear. I was paralyzed. My body was frozen, but my mind was screaming one word over and over. No, 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 this isn't real. This can't be real. My survival instinct must have kicked in because my hand, which was still holding the rifle, started to move. I was going to bring it up, to point it at the window, to do something, anything. But the moment my fingers twitched on the stock, the thing reacted. It pulled its head back from the glass in one smooth, fluid motion. The foggy imprint of its face lingered for a second before fading away. And as it stepped back into the slightly brighter patch of snow-reflected light, I saw the rest of it. It was enormous. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 8 feet, maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, rounded with thick muscle that bunched under that dark fur. Its arms were long, hanging down past its knees, ending in hands that looked more like powerful 5-fingered paws. It didn't lumber or shuffle. It moved with a strange, effortless grace, turning its whole body away from the window. I saw its profile for a split second. A heavy brow ridge, a flat nose, a jaw that seemed solid and strong. Then it was walking. It took a few strides around the corner of the cabin, its gait heavy and purposeful, making the snow crunch loudly under its weight. I just stood there, glued to the spot, listening to the footsteps fade as it moved toward the back of the cabin and then into the tree line. The sound of its movement was swallowed by the woods almost instantly. The silence rushed back in, but it was a different silence now. It was a waiting silence, a hunted silence. I finally managed to stumble back to the center of the room, my legs feeling like wet noodles. I brought the rifle up, pointing it shakily at the door, then at the front window, then back at the door. I was panting, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I felt like the walls of my safe little cabin had just dissolved. I was exposed, naked. I'd never felt so vulnerable in my entire life. I must have stood like that for an hour, maybe two, just shaking and listening. The normal night sounds did not return. The woods were still holding their breath. Then, from a distance, maybe a quarter-mile away, I heard it. It started as a low rumble, so deep I felt it in my chest, more than I heard it with my ears. It built into a long, drawn-out howl that was unlike anything I've ever heard in nature. It wasn't a wolf, it wasn't a coyote, it wasn't a bear. It was a deep, booming, guttural cry that echoed through the valley. It was a sound of pure, raw power, and it was filled with an intelligence that made my skin crawl. It howled 3 times, each one seeming to come from a slightly different direction, as if it was moving through the trees, circling me again, but from farther out. After the 3rd howl, the silence returned, deeper and more absolute than before. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in that chair with my rifle across my lap, staring at the door, jumping at every tiny crack from the dying fire. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was a physical weight on my shoulders. I could feel its eyes on the cabin, on me. I didn't see it again, but I knew it was out there. I knew it was waiting. When the first grey light of dawn finally started to filter through the windows, it felt like a reprieve. My whole body ached from tension. I waited until the sun was fully up, casting long shadows across the snow, before I even thought about moving. I loaded my rifle with a fresh cartridge, my hands still trembling, and I unlocked the door. The cold morning air hit my face like a slap. I stood in the doorway for a long time, just scanning the tree line, my finger on the trigger. Nothing moved. Slowly, I stepped out onto the porch, my boots sinking into the fresh snow. I looked toward the side window first. There in the snow beneath the window were the footprints. They were massive. I'm not talking about big bear tracks. These were footprints, bipedal, a clear heel, a ball, and 5 toes. I knelt down, my knees cracking in the cold. I pulled out my tape measure from my jacket pocket, 17 inches long, 17, from the heel to the tip of the longest toe, and about 8 inches wide. The stride was huge, covering ground in a way that was frankly terrifying to think about. I followed them with my eyes. They came out of the woods, went right up to the window, then turned and walked around the cabin and back into the deep timber. I stood up, my mind reeling. I felt a cold dread that had nothing to do with the morning air. This was real. It wasn't a dream. It wasn't a hallucination. The evidence was right there in the snow. I spent the whole day inside, my gear packed, just waiting. I felt like a prisoner in my own home. The woods, my sanctuary, now felt like a cage with a predator I couldn't understand. I stayed one more night because some stubborn part of me didn't want to be run off my own land, but it was the longest night of my life. The feeling of being watched never went away. I left the next morning at first light, and I haven't spent a night there since. I sold the cabin 6 months later. I couldn't go back. Not after that. People ask me what I think it was, and I just say I don't know. But I do know. I looked it in the eyes. I saw its face on my window, and sometimes on a quiet, cold night, I can still hear that deep, echoing howl, and I remember what it feels like to be prey. Story 5. It was just a normal Wednesday. I'd gone to the midweek service at my church like I always do. My friend, I'll just call him my friend, since we've known each other since high school, he came with me. We usually grab a bite after, but this time we both just wanted to get home. It had been a long day for both of us. We left the church parking lot a little after 9, I think. The sky was that deep, solid black you only get out in the country, with just a sliver of moon. The air was warm and thick, the kind of humid that makes your shirt stick to your back even with the car windows down. We were heading north on Highway 101. It's a two-lane road that cuts through a whole lot of nothing for long stretches. On one side, there are fields, sometimes a farmhouse with a single porch light glowing. On the other, it drops off into woods that get real dark and dense, eventually turning into swampy land that runs along the river. You know the area if you're from around here. It's the kind of road where you might see a deer or a raccoon, and you always slow down a little just in case. We were talking about nothing important, just rehashing the sermon, complaining about work the next day. The radio was on low, some classic rock station fading in and out. I was driving, my hands at 10 and 2 on the wheel, just cruising along at maybe 50 miles an hour. The headlights cut a tunnel through the darkness, and beyond that, it was just black. The kind of black that feels heavy. It was my friend who saw it first. He was in the passenger seat and he stopped mid-sentence and just pointed ahead toward the right shoulder of the road. "Whoa, slow down," he said, his voice tight. "Something's in the road." I took my foot off the gas right away. My first thought, anyone's first thought, was a deer. You see them all the time out here, and they have a habit of freezing in the headlights. But as we got closer, maybe 100 yards away, I could tell it wasn't right. It was too tall, way too tall, and it was standing upright. I remember my heart starting to thump against my ribs, a hard, slow beat. I eased my foot onto the brake, not a slam, but a steady pressure. The car slowed to a crawl, maybe 20 miles an hour. The headlights finally caught it full on as it started to move from the shoulder, stepping out onto our lane. It wasn't a deer. This thing was massive. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be at least 7.5, maybe 8 feet. It was built too. Not just tall, but broad. Its shoulders were huge, rounded and powerful, covered in what looked like wet, dark hair. It was a blackish-brown color, like the mud in the swamps after a rain. It was hunched over, but even hunched, it was towering. The way it moved, that's what I can't get out of my head. It didn't run. It took these long, purposeful strides, its arms swinging low past its knees. Its arms were incredibly long, just hanging down, and they swung like heavy pendulums with each step. It covered the width of our lane in just a couple of these strides. It was fast, but it wasn't frantic. It was efficient. My brain was screaming at me, trying to find a box to put it in. A bear? No. Bears don't walk like that. They don't have that kind of posture. Their arms aren't that long. A person in a costume out here in the middle of nowhere on a Wednesday night. It made no sense. The sheer size of it ruled out a person. This thing had to be 300-400 pounds of solid muscle. I could see the definition in its back and legs as it moved through the headlights. The hair wasn't shaggy like a bear's. It was shorter, matted down, almost slick. It stepped into the oncoming lane, and for a second, it was fully illuminated. That's when the fear really set in. A cold wave that started in my gut and washed out to my fingertips, making them feel numb on the steering wheel. I could see the back of its head. It didn't have much of a neck. Its head just sort of sat on those massive shoulders, and it was cone-shaped, wider at the top. I couldn't see any ears or much detail, just this dark, powerful silhouette. And then it did the thing that, in a weird way, was the most frightening part of the whole encounter. It ignored us, completely, totally. We were in a car, headlights blazing, engine rumbling, not 30 feet from it. It had to have seen us. It had to have heard us, but it didn't turn its head. It didn't speed up or slow down. It just kept walking with that same steady, ground-eating gait, like we were nothing, like we were a gust of wind or a falling leaf. Its indifference was chilling. It wasn't scared of us. It wasn't aggressive toward us. We were just irrelevant. I had brought the car to a complete stop now, right there in the middle of the northbound lane. The engine idled, a low vibration I could feel through the seat. Neither of us said a word. I think we'd both stopped breathing. I just watched, my eyes glued to it, as it reached the far shoulder of the road. It didn't pause. It just stepped off the asphalt and into the tall grass and weeds that bordered the woods, and then it was gone. Not like it ran away, it just dissolved into the shadows. 1 second it was there, a huge, solid, physical thing, and the next, the darkness had swallowed it whole. There was no sound, no cracking branches, no rustling leaves, nothing. The woods just went back to being a silent black wall. I sat there, my foot still on the brake, staring at the spot where it had disappeared. My knuckles were white. I could feel a single trickle of sweat running down my temple. My mouth was completely dry. My friend finally let out a breath, a shaky, ragged sound. What was that?" he whispered. He wasn't looking at me. He was still staring out his window into the darkness. I didn't have an answer. I just shook my head, my heart still hammering. I put the car back in drive and pressed the gas pedal slowly, my foot trembling. The car crept forward. As we passed the spot where it had crossed, I leaned forward, peering into the woods, trying to see anything. A shape, a movement, a pair of eyes reflecting the light. There was nothing, just an impenetrable tangle of trees and shadows. We drove in silence for a full minute, maybe 2. The only sound was the hum of the tires on the pavement and the staticky radio. The normal world felt fake, like a painted backdrop. What had just happened was the real thing, and this was the dream. "You saw that, right?" I finally said, my voice sounding strange and thin. "You saw it too." "Yeah," he said, his voice low. "I saw it." We started talking then, our words tumbling out fast, tripping over each other. It was huge. "Did you see how it walked? It didn't even look at us." "What was it?" We went over every detail. The hunch in its back, the way its arms swung so low, the thickness of its body, the complete and utter lack of interest in our presence. We were both witnesses, and we were both just as confused and terrified. That's when my friend brought up the stories. Everyone who grows up around here hears them. Old tales about the swamps along the river, about things that live deep in the woods where people don't go. They have different names: the swamp ape, the skunk ape. Most people laugh them off as folk tales, something to scare kids around a campfire. We'd always laughed about them too. We weren't laughing now. The rest of the drive home was agony. Every shadow at the edge of the headlights made me jump. Every clump of bushes looked like a hunched waiting form. I kept checking the rearview mirror, half expecting to see it loping behind the car, keeping pace with us. My skin was crawling, a persistent prickling sensation like 1,000 tiny insects were marching up and down my arms. I felt exposed, like something out there in the dark could see us perfectly, even though we couldn't see it. I dropped my friend off at his house. We didn't say much, just a quick, "You good?" and a nod. "Call me tomorrow." Another nod. I watched him walk to his front door, his shoulders hunched, his head on a swivel, checking his own yard before he went inside. When I got to my own house, I didn't just get out of the car. I sat in the driveway for a few minutes, the engine off, listening to the ticks and pings of the cooling metal. I scanned the tree line at the back of my property. It felt different now. The night wasn't peaceful anymore. It was watchful. I went inside and locked the door, something I don't always bother to do out here. I checked all the windows. I felt stupid, but I couldn't help it. The image of that thing was burned onto the back of my eyelids. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it walking, those long arms swinging, that powerful body moving with such easy, terrifying purpose. I tried to sleep, but I just lay there in the dark, staring at the ceiling. My mind kept replaying those 10 seconds over and over, the moment it stepped into the light, the sheer scale of it, the way the light glistened on its dark, wet-looking hair, the utter silence of its disappearance. The thing that haunts me the most, the thing that keeps me up at night, isn't just what it looked like. It was how it acted. It wasn't a monster from a movie, roaring and charging. It was just going about its business. We were an inconvenience, a momentary blip on its radar. It owned those woods. It owned that night. And we were just visitors, trespassing in its world for a few seconds. I've driven down that stretch of 101 a couple times since then, in the daylight. It looks ordinary, just a road, some fields, some woods, but I know what's in there now. Or at least, I know that I don't know what's in there. The local legends don't seem so funny anymore. They seem like warnings. I don't have any answers. I don't know what we saw. All I know is that it was real. It was huge, and it looked right through us, like we were ghosts. And sometimes late at night I'll wake up and think I hear something outside, a heavy, quiet step in the yard, and I'll lie there perfectly still listening, my heart pounding in my ears, waiting for a sound that never comes. Story 6. All right, I'm just going to dive right in because typing this out still makes my hands shake, even though it's been a while. I need to get this off my chest, and maybe putting it into words will help somehow. But honestly, I doubt it. This happened to me and my family back in January 2018. We lived in a house just outside a tiny town in northern West Virginia. It's the kind of place where you know your neighbors, but they're spaced far enough apart that you don't see them every day. Our property is surrounded by woods, thick and deep, the kind that feels ancient, especially in winter when everything is bare and silent. That particular evening, it was brutally cold. I remember because we'd all been complaining about it earlier. The kind of cold that seeps into your bones, even inside with the heat on. We were in the living room, just my mom, dad, older brother and me. Our dog, a big German shepherd named Rex, was lying on the rug near the fireplace, which we had going to take the edge off. The TV was on, some reality show, but none of us were really paying attention. We were just lounging around, the way families do on a weeknight when there's nothing else to do. I was sitting on the couch, facing the big picture window that looks out onto our gravel driveway and the woods beyond. It was already dark outside, probably around 6 or 7 in the evening, and the only light came from the TV and the fireplace. Everything felt normal, cozy even. I remember thinking how quiet it was. No wind, no cars passing by, just the crackle of the fire and the low hum of the TV. Then something caught my eye through the window. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, maybe a shadow from the trees. But it moved, and it was big. I sat up straighter, squinting, and that's when I saw it clearly, a massive, upright shape, way taller than any person, moving slowly down our driveway. My heart just dropped. I couldn't process what I was seeing. It was like my brain refused to believe it. I whispered, "Dad, look." But it came out choked. My dad was in his armchair, and he turned to see what I was pointing at. The rest of us followed his gaze, and for a second, nobody said anything. We all just stared. This thing was over 8 feet tall, covered in coarse, dark hair that looked almost black in the dim light. It was walking on 2 legs, steady and powerful, and it was dragging something behind it. As it got closer to the house, I could see it was a deer, a full-grown buck from the look of it, and it was freshly killed. Blood was dripping from its neck or somewhere, leaving a dark, wet trail on the gravel. The creature moved like it owned the place, no hesitation, just this slow, deliberate pace. It was pulling the deer by one hind leg, and the deer's body slid easily, like it weighed nothing. I could hear the crunch of gravel under its feet, a heavy, rhythmic sound that seemed too loud in the silence. Rex, who's usually barky at anything moving outside, didn't make a sound. He lifted his head, ears perked, but then he whimpered and tucked his tail, crawling closer to my mom's legs. That scared me more than anything. Rex is fearless, but he was terrified. My dad stood up slowly, not taking his eyes off the window. "What the hell is that?" he muttered, but it wasn't a question any of us could answer. My mom grabbed my brother's arm, her knuckles white. I felt frozen, like I couldn't move or breathe. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. The creature was maybe 20 feet from the window now, and in the faint light from the house, I could see more details. Its arms were long and muscular, swinging slightly as it walked. The hair wasn't smooth, it was shaggy, almost matted in places, and I could see patches where it was thicker around the shoulders and chest. Then my dad did something that made my stomach lurch. He reached for the switch by the door and flipped on the floodlight we have outside. It's a bright, harsh light that illuminates the whole driveway and part of the yard. When it clicked on, the creature stopped dead in its tracks. It didn't jump or startle. It just paused and turned its head toward the house. That's when I got a clear look at its face. It had a heavy, prominent brow that shadowed its eyes, which were dark and deep set. They weren't glowing or anything supernatural, just dark, like pools of ink. But they felt intelligent, alert. Its face was broad, with a flat nose and a strong jaw. And it had this calm, almost curious expression. It didn't look scared or aggressive, it just seemed aware, like it was assessing us, taking in the situation. For a few seconds, it stood there, completely still, and I could see its chest moving with each breath. The deer lay at its feet, blood still oozing onto the gravel. Nobody in the room moved. I think we were all holding our breath. I could feel the cold from the window seeping through, mixing with the chill running down my spine. My hands were clammy, and I had this irrational fear that if I blinked, it would charge at the house. But it didn't. After what felt like an eternity, it turned back, grabbed the deer's leg again, and continued walking toward the woods. Its movement was so effortless, like it was carrying a bag of groceries instead of a full-sized deer. It didn't look back at us again. As it reached the edge of the tree line, it vanished into the shadows, and the woods swallowed it up. The whole thing probably lasted less than a minute, but it felt like hours. For a long moment after it was gone, we all just stood there, stunned. The floodlight was still on, casting long shadows, and the only sound was Rex's low whine. My dad was the first to speak. "Stay inside," he said, his voice tight. He grabbed a flashlight from the drawer and peered out the window, but there was nothing to see. After a few minutes, when we were sure it wasn't coming back, we decided to go outside and look. I remember pulling on my coat, my hands shaking so bad I could barely zip it up. The cold hit me like a wall when we stepped onto the porch, and the air smelled like damp earth and something else, a musky, animal scent that I'd never noticed before. We walked down the driveway, my dad in front with the flashlight, me and my brother behind him, and my mom staying on the porch with Rex. The first thing we saw was the blood trail. It was smeared and blotchy, leading from where we'd first spotted the creature all the way to the woods. But what really made my stomach clench were the footprints. They were huge, easily 16 inches long and deep, like whatever made them was incredibly heavy. The prints were human-like, with 5 toes, but broader and more splayed out. Between them were drag marks from the deer, and in one spot we found strands of dark hair caught on a rough patch of gravel. My dad picked one up. It was coarse and thick, almost like horsehair, but darker. We didn't go far into the woods. It was too dark and too scary. We just stood there at the edge, shining the flashlight into the trees, but everything was still and silent. No sounds, no movement, just the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. I kept expecting to see those dark eyes staring back at us, but there was nothing. We went back inside after that, locking the door behind us, and spent the rest of the night huddled in the living room, too freaked out to sleep. I won't go into what happened after that day because, honestly, the worst of it was right then. But that image, the creature's calm face, the way it moved with such purpose, it's burned into my mind. I still can't explain what we saw, and I doubt I ever will. It wasn't a bear or a person in a costume. It was something else, something that shouldn't exist, but it does, and it was right there in our driveway. Story 7. Okay, so I've been sitting on this for a while now, but I need to get it out there. I've read a bunch of stories on here about weird stuff happening in the woods, and I always thought, nah, that can't be real. But after what happened to me and my husband and our friends last summer, I don't doubt anything anymore. This is gonna be long, but I need to write it all down while it's still fresh in my mind, even though it's been months. It's like if I don't, it'll eat me up inside. We were camping at this private lake in southeastern Ohio. My husband's family has a spot out there, kind of secluded, not too far from some small towns, but enough that you feel like you're in the middle of nowhere. We'd planned the trip for the 4th of July weekend, from the 3rd to the 7th, just to get away from work and relax. There were 6 of us total, me, my husband, and 4 friends. We'd done this before, so we thought we knew what to expect. Quiet nights, bonfires, maybe some fishing, normal stuff. The day everything went down was the 4th of July. We'd spent the afternoon grilling, swimming, just hanging out. As it got dark, we set off some fireworks. Nothing crazy, just sparklers and a few small things my husband brought. By around 11 at night, most of us were tired, but me, my husband, and 2 of our friends decided to take the kayaks out on the lake. The water was dead calm, like glass, and the sky was clear with a bunch of stars. It was peaceful, you know, the kind of quiet where you can hear your own heartbeat. We were just floating there, maybe 20 or 30 yards from the shore, talking in low voices about nothing important. I remember feeling the cool breeze on my skin and the kayak rocking gently under me. Then, out of nowhere, this smell hit us. It was strong, like a skunk, but worse, kind of musky and rotten, like something had died. The wind was coming from the west bank, so that's where it seemed to be coming from. We all kind of froze and started whispering about what it could be. One of my friends joked that maybe a skunk had gotten into something, but it didn't feel right. The smell was too intense, and it hung in the air like a fog. A few minutes later, we heard this crashing sound from the east side of the lake. It was loud, like something big was moving through the woods over there. We have power lines running along that side, so there's a cleared corridor, and the sound was coming from beyond that. It wasn't just branches snapping, it was like heavy footsteps thudding and breaking through underbrush. We all went silent, just listening. My husband shined his mag light toward the sound, but we couldn't see anything. Just darkness and the silhouette of trees. Then the real terror started. Out of nowhere, this huge rock came flying out of the woods from the east side. I'm not exaggerating when I say it was the size of a German shepherd. It sailed through the air and landed in the water with a massive splash, maybe 15 yards from one of the kayaks. Water sprayed everywhere, and I felt my heart jump into my throat. We all started panicking, paddling backward, trying to get away from where it came from. My husband was shouting, "What the hell was that?" But none of us had an answer. Before we could even process it, another rock was thrown. This one was even bigger, and it landed closer. Within 10 yards of the kayak my friend was in. It hit the water with a loud thwack, and the waves rocked our kayaks hard. I remember gripping the sides of my kayak so tight, my knuckles turned white. My mind was racing. Who would be throwing rocks, and how could anyone throw something that big? It didn't make sense. That's when my husband grabbed the bottle rockets we had left from earlier. He lit one and shot it toward the woods where the rocks came from. It zipped through the air and exploded with a pop, lighting up the area for a second. Then he loaded his shotgun. He always brings it camping, just in case of animals or whatever. He didn't fire it yet, just had it ready. We were all scared shitless, I'm not gonna lie. I could feel my hands shaking, and my breath was coming in short gasps. While we were staring at the east side, something made me look toward the west bank. That's when I saw it. There was a tree maybe 50 feet away, and behind it, this creature was peeking out. It was rocking side to side, like it was curious or maybe agitated. Under the mag light my husband was holding, I could see it clearly. It was about 4.5 to 5 feet tall, stocky, with no neck. Its head seemed to sit right on its shoulders. Its shoulders were broad, and it was covered in light to medium brown hair, kind of matted. But the worst part was its eyes. They were dark yellow, and they glowed in the light like a cat's eyes, but bigger. I felt this cold dread wash over me. It wasn't a bear. I've seen bears, and this was different. It didn't move like an animal I knew. It just stood there, rocking, watching us. We were all frozen, just staring. I could hear my own pulse pounding in my ears. Then from the south we heard this whooping sound. It was loud and eerie, like a deep hoot, but with a human-like quality. As soon as it happened, the creature behind the tree stopped rocking, turned, and moved off into the woods. It disappeared so fast, like it melted into the shadows. But the whooping call, it sent chills down my spine. It wasn't just one thing out there. It felt like there were multiple surrounding us. After that, we didn't waste any time. We paddled back to shore as fast as we could, our hearts still racing. Once we were on land, we huddled together near the campfire, which had died down to embers. My husband kept the shotgun close, and we all just sat there, listening. The night wasn't quiet anymore. We started hearing these other sounds, like a baby crying but distorted, like it was coming from far away. Then what sounded like a woman screaming but not human, more like an imitation, and heavy breathing, like something was right outside the camp, but we couldn't see anything. Every time we heard a noise, we'd jump, and my husband would shine the light around, but there was nothing there. We stayed up the rest of the night until the sun started to come up. None of us slept a wink. We just replayed what happened over and over, trying to make sense of it. My friend kept saying it had to be people messing with us. But how could people throw rocks that big? And that creature, I can't get its eyes out of my head. The glowing yellow, the way it moved, it wasn't human. As it got lighter, we noticed something about the power line corridor. It's this cleared path that runs through the woods, and we realized that all the sounds and movement seemed to be along that route, like whatever it was, they were using it to travel. We packed up our stuff early and left that morning, even though we were supposed to stay until the 7th. No one argued, we just wanted to get out of there. I still think about it all the time, the smell, the rocks, that creature, the sounds. It's left me with this unease whenever I'm in the woods now. I don't have any explanation for what it was, and I don't think I ever will. It's just one of those things that happened, and I'm left wondering what else is out there that we don't know about. Story 8. I still don't know how to talk about what happened that day without my hands shaking. It was late October, around 2016, and we were living on our farm just outside Marion, Kentucky. Me, my wife Carla, and our 2 teenage boys. We'd been there for years, and it was always quiet, the kind of place where you could hear the leaves rustle from a mile away. That day started like any other. I was out fixing fences near the woods because one of the posts had loosened after a rainstorm. The air had that crisp fall feel, and I remember thinking how peaceful it was, how lucky we were. I was hammering in a new board when I first caught a whiff of something off. It wasn't like anything I'd smelled before, not like a dead animal or rot, but this sour, musky odor, like wet dog mixed with something rotten, but stronger. It hung in the air, thick enough that I could almost taste it. I paused for a minute, looking toward the tree line, but I didn't see anything out of the ordinary. Just the usual oaks and pines, shadows starting to stretch as the afternoon wore on. I shrugged it off, figuring it might be a skunk or something, and went back to work. But the smell didn't go away. If anything, it got stronger, clinging to the back of my throat. Later, when I came in for dinner, Carla mentioned it too. She'd been out by the chicken coop, gathering eggs, and she said the same thing. That sour smell was all around there, so bad it made her eyes water. We laughed it off at first, joking about some critter having a bad day, but I could see the unease in her eyes. Our boys were inside, probably on their phones or doing homework, and everything felt normal. But that smell, it stuck with me. As dusk settled in, the dogs started up. We have 2 border collies, Buddy and Max, and they're usually pretty chill, but that night they were going crazy, barking and growling like they'd seen a ghost. I stepped out onto the porch to see what was up, and that's when it hit me. The stench was overwhelming, like it had concentrated right there. It was so thick I almost gagged, and I had to cover my nose with my sleeve. The growls weren't from the dogs anymore. They were coming from near the barn, deep and guttural, the kind of sound that vibrates in your chest. My heart started pounding, and I felt this cold sweat break out on my back. I yelled for Carla to stay inside with the boys, and I grabbed my rifle from by the door. I've hunted my whole life, but this felt different. This wasn't some deer or coyote. I crept down the porch steps, the wood creaking under my boots, and peered toward the barn. The moon was out, casting these long shadows, and I could see the barn door shaking like something was pushing against it from the inside. Then, without warning, it exploded outward, not like in a movie, but with this loud crack, splinters flying everywhere, and that's when I saw it. This massive, hairy thing, standing upright on two legs, but taller than any man I've ever seen. It must have been 8 feet tall, with arms that hung down past its knees, and its eyes. They glinted red in the moonlight, like hot coals. The smell was choking me now, and I could hear my own breath coming in short gasps. It didn't even look at me at first. It just turned and lunged toward the chicken coop. The wire mesh tore like paper, and chickens were squawking and flapping everywhere. I raised my rifle and fired, once, twice, but it didn't even flinch. The shots echoed, but the thing just kept going, grabbing chickens, and I don't even want to describe what it did to them. It was brutal, like it was tearing them apart for fun. Then it moved to the cow pen. We had an old dairy cow, Bessie, and the thing just wrapped its hands around her neck and twisted. I heard this sickening crack, and Bessie went down without a sound. I fired again, my hands shaking so bad I could barely aim, but the bullets might as well have been pebbles. It didn't bleed, didn't slow down. Windows on the barn shattered, glass flying everywhere, and the thing let out this roar that made my ears ring. It was so loud, I felt it in my bones. I was frozen for a second, just staring, and that's when another one came out of the trees, a second creature just as big, maybe bigger. They faced each other, and that's when the real terror set in. They started making these sounds, not like animals I've ever heard, but deep guttural barks and growls, like they were arguing. It was furious, back and forth, and the air felt charged, like before a storm. I could see their chests heaving, and the first one pounded the ground with its fists, making the dirt fly up. Then, as quick as it started, the first one turned and vanished into the woods, and the second one followed. Just like that, they were gone. The silence that followed was almost worse. I could hear the dogs whining inside, and Carla was screaming my name from the house. I stumbled back, my legs like jelly, and we all huddled together inside, not knowing what to do. We didn't sleep that night. We just stayed up listening, and we heard more roars in the distance long into the early hours. By morning, the destruction was everywhere. Dead chickens, Bessie with her neck broken, the coop and barn crushed in places. There were footprints, huge ones, but no signs of eating or anything. It was like they just wanted to wreck things. We packed what we could and drove to our neighbor's place, and even there, we heard those roars again that night. We never went back to live there. Sold the farm as soon as we could. Took a loss, but we didn't care. We moved to town, and I still wake up sometimes, smelling that sour stench, hearing those growls. I'll never forget the way that first one looked at me, not like an animal, but with this intelligent anger, like it knew what it was doing. And when it responded to the calls from the woods, it was like it was part of something bigger. I don't know what they were, and I don't want to. All I know is that day changed everything, and I'm just glad we got out alive. Story 9 was July, the middle of July in 2015. My buddy and I, we'd been planning this 3-day backpacking trip for months. We're not experts, but we're not rookies either. We know the Coast Range foothills, or at least we thought we did. This was our second day, a Tuesday. The air was thick and warm, the kind of heat that sits on your skin and doesn't move. We'd been hiking since sunrise, following this old trail that wound alongside a creek, the kind of path that's more dirt and roots than anything else. We came around a bend and there it was, this old bridge. It was just there. Rusted metal framework, wooden planks that were grey and splintered with age. It didn't look like it belonged to any real road. Just this forgotten thing spanning the creek, which was about 20 feet below. The water was loud, a constant rush and gurgle over rocks. It was the only sound, besides some Steller's jays squawking way off in the distance. We decided to take a break right there on the bridge. It felt solid enough, you know. We dropped our packs, leaned against the rusty railing, and just breathed. That's when I heard it. At first, I thought it was the water, some weird echo in the gorge. But it wasn't. It was a breathing sound, a deep, heavy, wet breathing. It was coming from directly beneath us, under the bridge. It was so low and resonant I could feel it vibrating up through the soles of my boots, a faint thrumming in the wooden planks. My friend heard it too. I saw his head snap up, his eyes go wide. We didn't say anything, we just looked at each other. My heart was suddenly hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat that felt too loud for the quiet forest. The rational part of my brain was scrambling. A bear, it had to be a bear, a big one, holed up under the bridge to cool off. That's what I told myself. But the sound, it was too rhythmic, too chesty. It sounded like it came from a set of lungs bigger than any bear I'd ever heard of. I got down on my hands and knees, the rough, sun-bleached wood digging into my palms. My friend whispered, "Dude, what are you doing?" But I ignored him. I had to see. I had to know. I found a gap between two planks, a long, narrow slit about an inch wide. I pressed my face to it, squinting down into the shadows under the bridge. It took a second for my eyes to adjust. It was dark down there, a jumble of shadows cast by the structure above and the ferns on the bank. The creek water reflected little slivers of light dancing on the concrete abutments, and then I saw it. A mass, a huge, dark mass, shifting. It wasn't just a shadow, it was moving. It was covered in hair, but it wasn't uniform. It was patchy, matted in places, almost like thick, shaggy fur caked with mud. And the shoulders, God, the shoulders, they were impossibly wide, way too broad and squared off for a bear. A bear slopes. This thing was built like a fridge. I froze. I couldn't even breathe. I was just staring down at this thing, this mass, as it shifted its weight, and then a hand came into view. It was a hand, I mean it had to be, but it was massive. It was covered in the same dark, muddy hair, and it was gripping a basketball-sized rock from the creek bed. The fingers were long, thick, and ended in dark, blunt nails. It wasn't a paw. It wrapped around that rock like a human hand would, with a thumb. It used that rock for leverage, pulling itself forward, out from the deepest shadows. It emerged slowly, hunched over because of the low clearance under the bridge. The sound of its breathing got louder, a wet, guttural rasp that echoed under the wooden deck. It was crawling on all fours, but its front limbs were so long it was almost more of a knuckle walk. Then it stopped, right below me. I could see the top of its head, broad and conical, no neck to speak of. It tilted its head upward, and it looked right at me. Through the 1-inch gap in the planks I saw an eye, a large amber-colored eye. It wasn't glowing, but it caught the light in a way that made it seem like it was lit from within. It was intelligent. I know that sounds crazy, but it was. It wasn't the blank stare of an animal. It was a knowing, calculating look. It saw me. It knew I was there, staring down at it. The eye held mine for a second that felt like an hour. I could see the dark pupil, the ring of lighter gold around it. I was pinned there, trapped by that gaze. A sound started then, a low rumbling that wasn't a growl. It was deeper than that, a vibration that started in its chest and seemed to pour out of it, shaking the very bridge we were on. It was a warning, a pure, physical warning that traveled up through the wood and into my bones. I felt it in my teeth. I scrambled backward so fast, I scraped my knees raw on the splintered wood. My friend was already backing away, his face a mask of pure terror. We didn't speak. We just moved, our bodies operating on some primal instinct that screamed, "Run!" And then it moved. It didn't charge. It dropped. It just let go and dropped them maybe 6 feet into the creek with a huge, explosive splash. Water erupted, soaking the banks. For a second, it was just chaos and spray. Then we saw it, plowing through the waist-deep water. It wasn't running, it was just moving, and it was fast, unbelievably fast for something so huge. It churned through the creek, water flying, and in 3 or 4 powerful strides, it was on the far bank. It rose then. It stood up fully upright on 2 legs. It had to be over 8 feet tall. The barrel-shaped torso was massive, layered with muscle that bunched and shifted under wet, dark hair. Its arms hung down past its knees, long and powerful. Water streamed off it in sheets. It stood there for a moment, dripping, its back to us, and I could see the sheer bulk of it, the width of its back, the power in its legs. The smell hit us then, carried on the breeze. It was a mix of wet dog, rotten meat, and something else, something musky and foul like a bog. It turned its head, not its body, just its head, over its shoulder. Those same amber eyes found us again, across the 30 or so feet of creek. It looked at us one last time. There was no anger, no rage. It was just a look, a final penetrating stare. Then it turned back, took 1 step and was gone. It just melted into the wall of salal and ferns and Douglas firs. There was no sound of crashing branches, no indication of its passage. It was just absorbed by the forest. The silence that fell was heavier and more terrifying than the noise had been. The jays had stopped calling. The forest was dead quiet. We didn't wait. We grabbed our packs, didn't even bother putting them on properly, just slung them over one shoulder, and we ran. We ran back up the trail the way we had come. We didn't look back. But the feeling of being watched was so intense it was like a physical pressure between my shoulder blades. Every hair on my body was standing up. I kept expecting to hear something behind us, the sound of something huge and fast, moving through the trees. But there was nothing, just the sound of our own ragged breathing and our pounding footsteps. We ran until our lungs were on fire and our legs were jelly. We must have gone a mile, maybe more, before we finally collapsed, leaning against trees, vomiting from the adrenaline and exhaustion. We didn't talk about what we saw. Not then. We just packed up our camp early, hiked all the way back to the car in a frantic, silent rush, and got the hell out of there. We cut the 3-day trip short by a day and a half. It was weeks later, when the sharp edge of the fear had dulled to a constant low-grade dread, that I was going through the photos on my camera. I'd taken a few that morning before we reached the bridge. There was one, a shot of the creek from the trail just before the bend. A nice, scenic shot. I was about to delete it, my finger hovering over the button, when I saw it, in the background, on the far side of the creek, half hidden in the deep shadows of the trees. A dark, vertical shape, tall, and way too thick to be a tree trunk. It was standing there, watching us, even before we ever saw the bridge. The encounter itself lasted less than 2 minutes, from the first breath to it disappearing into the trees, but the image of it crawling out from under that bridge, the sound of its breathing, the weight of its intelligence in that look, it's burned into me. I can close my eyes and be right back there, feeling the vibration in the wood, smelling that god-awful smell, seeing that amber eye staring right through the crack, right into me. We never went back to that trail. I don't think I could ever set foot in those woods again. Story 10. It was one of those mornings where the fog just wouldn't quit. I remember waking up in the dark, the alarm clock blaring, and already feeling that knot in my stomach. You get a feel for the weather in this job, a kind of sixth sense. And I knew before I even pulled back the curtain that my usual 5 a.m. takeoff wasn't happening. The window was just a solid sheet of white, not the wispy, pretty kind of fog, but the thick, soupy stuff that just sits on the world and smothers it. Lee County, South Carolina, in May, can be like that. Humid as all hell, and the fog just clings to the low fields like a wet blanket. My name's Frank Mitchell. I was a crop duster. Still am, I guess. Though what happened that day, well, it changed things. It was May 1988. I remember the date because it was a Tuesday, and Tuesdays were always for the big soybean fields out by the old Miller place, a couple thousand acres that needed spraying. I drank my coffee standing by that window, watching the nothingness outside. The house was quiet, too quiet, just the hum of the fridge and the sound of my own breathing. I was antsy. When you have a schedule, a rhythm to your work, a delay like this just throws your whole system off. It makes you feel behind before you've even started. I kept checking the clock, watching the minutes crawl by, each one feeling longer than the last. The radio was on, some crackly early morning show, but I wasn't really hearing it. My head was already up in the air, running through the flight path in my mind. Finally, around 7:30, the sun started burning through. It didn't clear all at once. It was more like the world was slowly developing, shapes emerging from the white. First the big oak tree at the edge of my property, then the fence line, then the distant treetops. The sky went from white to a pale, washed-out blue. It was good enough. I grabbed my gear, my flight plan clipboard, my lunch pail with a ham sandwich my wife had made, and headed out to the airstrip. The air was heavy and cool, smelling of wet earth and cut grass. My plane, an old air tractor, was sitting there waiting, its yellow paint looking dull in the hazy light. I did my walk around, my hands running over the wings, checking the flaps, the tires. It was all routine, muscle memory. But that morning, the routine felt fragile. I kept glancing towards the tree line that bordered the southern end of the runway. It was just a dark, solid mass of pines and scrub oaks. I'd looked at it 1,000 times, but for some reason that morning it felt different. It felt like it was watching me. I shook my head, blaming it on the weird fog and the late start. Nerves. I climbed into the cockpit. The familiar smell of old leather, fuel and metal filled my nose. It was a smell that usually scented me, but today it just felt close and tight. I went through the startup sequence, the engine coughing to life with a roar that shattered the morning quiet. The prop became a blur, and the whole plane started to vibrate, that powerful, familiar shuddering that meant it was time to go to work. I radioed in, my voice sounding tinny even to my own ears. Lee County Ag, this is Mitchell, Air Tractor 902 Charlie, taxiing for takeoff on runway 27. I got the all clear and lined up. I pushed the throttle forward, the engine's roar deepening, and the plane began to roll. I was focused on the strip ahead, my hands and feet making small adjustments, feeling the wheels rumble over the asphalt. The airspeed indicator started to come alive. 40 knots. 50. I was picking up speed, the trees at the far end getting closer, the world starting to blur at the edges of my vision, and that's when I saw it. It came out of the tree line on my left, from that same dark mass of woods that had been bothering me earlier. It wasn't a deer, it wasn't a bear. I've seen plenty of both, and this was neither. It was a creature loping across the runway, maybe 150 yards ahead of me. It was moving fast, but not running scared like an animal would from the noise of the plane. It was a steady, powerful, ground-eating gait, a lope. Its body was a grayish-brown color, like dirty bark or wet stone. It was covered in what looked like hair, but it was matted, almost slicked down. My brain tried to process it, to file it into a category I understood, and it just couldn't. The size of it was all wrong. It was huge, taller than a man, and built thick through the chest and shoulders. Its arms were long, swinging with its stride, but it was the face. As it crossed directly in front of my path, it turned its head and looked right at me. The plane was still accelerating, maybe at 60 knots by then, and I was bearing down on it. That face, it was like a monkey's but flattened and so much more intelligent, There was no panic in its eyes, no fear of the massive roaring machine heading straight for it. Its eyes were dark, deep set, and they held mine for a split second that felt like an hour. There was a weight to that look, a kind of ancient knowing that froze the blood in my veins. It wasn't a blank animal stare, it was a look of assessment, of recognition. Then it was gone. In two more of those powerful, fluid strides, it reached the other side of the runway and vanished back into the trees. It moved with an agility that was terrifying. It didn't crash through the underbrush, it just melted into the shadows and was gone. My heart was hammering against my ribs like it was trying to escape. I let out a breath I didn't know I was holding, a shaky, ragged sound. My hands were clenched so tight on the controls, my knuckles were white. The plane was still rolling, the end of the runway coming up fast. Instinct took over. I pulled back on the yoke, and the plane lifted off, the rumble of the wheels stopping as we climbed into the hazy sky. For a few minutes, I just flew. I didn't think. I just operated the plane, my body on autopilot while my mind was a screaming, static-filled mess. What the hell was that? What the hell was that? I kept replaying it in my head. The grey-brown color, the size, the way it moved. That face, that goddamn face looking right at me. I leveled off at my spraying altitude, but my hands were still trembling. I looked down at the land below, the patchwork of green and brown fields, but I wasn't really seeing them. All I could see was that thing loping across the asphalt. I tried to tell myself it was a bear, a big, weird-looking bear. But bears don't move like that. They don't have those long, swinging arms. They don't have a face like a monkey, and they sure as hell don't look at you with that kind of calm, direct intelligence. The job needed doing. I had a schedule. I flew my first pass over the field, the sprayer kicking on, laying down a cloud of pesticide. But my heart wasn't in it. My eyes were constantly darting down, scanning the tree lines, the fence rows, the edges of the fields. I was looking for movement, for a glimpse of that grey-brown shape. After the first few passes, I knew I had to go back. I had to see. I banked the plane, turning it in a wide arc that would take me back over the airstrip. It felt wrong, turning back like that in the middle of a job, but I had to know. I had to prove to myself that it was just a trick of the light, a weird shadow, my mind playing games after a foggy morning. I came in low, lower than I should have, skimming the treetops. My eyes were fixed on the spot where it had disappeared. The runway was empty, just grey asphalt, the yellow centerline, the green grass on either side. I flew the length of it, my head on a swivel, looking for any sign, a broken branch, a footprint, anything. There was nothing. It was just gone. The woods were still and dark. It was as if it had never been there at all. And that was somehow worse. If it had been a bear, I would have seen some trace, a disturbance, something. This was a clean disappearance. It had been there solid and real and terrifying, and then it had simply ceased to exist. The rest of the flight was a blur. I finished the job, my movements robotic. I landed the plane, my taxi back to the hangar feeling unnaturally slow and quiet. When I cut the engine, the silence was deafening. I just sat there in the cockpit for a long time, staring at my hands. They were still shaking. I didn't tell anyone at the airfield. What would I say? "Hey, Bob, I think I almost hit Bigfoot on the runway this morning." They'd have laughed me out of the county. I went through the motions of securing the plane, of filling out my paperwork. My signature looked like a stranger's. I drove home. The sun was high and hot by then, burning off the last of the fog, but I felt cold. I kept checking my rearview mirror, half expecting to see a tall, grey-brown shape loping after my truck down the empty country road. I walked into my house, and my wife asked how my day was. I just said, "Fine." Fog delayed me. I couldn't eat the other half of my sandwich. I just felt hollowed out, unsettled in a way I'd never been before. It wasn't just the fear of the moment, it was the implication of it. That thing was out there. It was real. And it had looked at me. It had seen me sitting in that cockpit. And in that brief shared glance, it had communicated something I still can't put into words. It wasn't aggression. It wasn't curiosity. It was just awareness. A profound, ancient awareness that I was an intruder in its world, and it was letting me know it. That was over 30 years ago. I still fly. I still dust crops. But I never take off from that strip on a foggy morning without my eyes glued to that tree line. And I never ever fly over that spot without looking down, my heart in my throat, half expecting to see it again, looking up at me with those dark, knowing eyes. I never saw it again. But I know it's out there, and I know that it saw me. Story 11. It was one of those thick, humid afternoons in late August where the air feels like a warm, wet blanket the second you step outside. I remember the exact date, August 23rd, the kind of day where the cicadas are buzzing so loud it's like a constant ringing in your ears, and the sunlight comes through the oak and hickory trees in thick, hazy shafts, not really lighting things up so much as just making the shadows look deeper. My property is 80 acres in rural southeastern Oklahoma, not far from the Kiamichi Mountains. It's not a manicured piece of land. It's rugged, with rolling hills, dense patches of woods, and a couple of creeks that run brown after a good rain. I've lived out here for 15 years. You get used to the sounds, the sights, the feeling of being alone, or you think you do. That day I had a simple job to do. I needed to walk the southern fence line. We'd had some storms a few nights before, and I wanted to check for any downed wires or posts. It's a chore I do a few times a year. I also had my rifle with me, a 30-6, because the wild hogs have been getting bolder. They'll tear up a field overnight, nasty things. So around 2 in the afternoon, I grabbed my rifle, a bottle of water, and headed out. The trail I take is an old one, probably used more by deer than people. It's just a narrow dirt path worn into the forest floor, weaving between the trees. The walk started out normal. Just the crunch of my boots on the dry leaves, the buzz of insects, the distant call of a crow. I was sweating through my t-shirt already, the rifle strap digging into my shoulder. My mind was on practical things, that fence post near the creek that always rots out, whether I should clear some of the underbrush before hunting season. Normal stuff, the kind of mental checklist you make when you're doing a boring job on your own land. It was about 2:30 when I came around a bend in the trail. Up ahead, maybe 60 yards away, there's a massive old oak tree, one of the biggest on the property. Its branches create a huge canopy, and the ground underneath is always in deep shadow, even at the height of day, and that's where I saw it. At first, my brain just registered a dark shape. My immediate thought was, black bear. We have them around here, though you don't see them often. They're usually shy. I stopped walking and just stood there, my hand automatically going to the rifle strap on my shoulder, but something was off. The shape was too big, way too big, and it wasn't moving like a bear. It was just sitting. It was sitting with its back against the trunk of the oak tree, its legs drawn up. The posture was weirdly human-like, not like a person exactly, but like how a person would sit to rest, slumped forward a bit, arms resting on its knees. But this was no person. My heart, which had been beating a steady, lazy rhythm, suddenly kicked into a different gear. It wasn't a panicked sprint, not yet. It was this heavy, thick pounding in my chest, like a drum being hit with a mallet. Thump, thump, thump. I didn't move a muscle, I just stared. The longer I looked, the more details my brain started to pick out, and the more the fear began to curdle in my stomach. Its hair was a dark, matted brown, almost black in the shadows. It was long and looked kind of shaggy, but its face was a lighter color, not pale, but a kind of tan, leathery brown, and it didn't have a snout. It wasn't a bear's face. The features were flattened, and I could see the profile of what looked like a heavy brow ridge. I couldn't make out eyes or a mouth from that distance and angle, just the shape of its head. It was huge. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing, even sitting down, looked like it would tower over me. Its shoulders were impossibly broad. This is the part that's hard to explain to people who weren't there. The terror wasn't a scream. It was a quiet, sinking feeling. It was the absolute certainty that I was looking at something I was not supposed to see. Something that wasn't in the rule book for my life out here. This wasn't a bear, a hog, or a deer. This was something else entirely, and every instinct in my body was telling me to be very, very still. I must have stood there for a full 2 minutes, just watching it. It didn't move. It seemed like it was resting, or maybe even asleep. The air felt different. The cicadas were still buzzing, but it was like their sound was coming from far away, muffled by this bubble of dread I was in. I could feel the sweat trickling down my temple, but I was afraid to even lift my hand to wipe it away. I was afraid the slightest motion would draw its attention. My mind was racing, but my body was frozen. What was the protocol here? Do I shoot it? The thought flashed through my mind, but it was followed immediately by a wave of sheer, cold fear. What if my shot just pissed it off? What if it wasn't alone? The stories you hear, the legends, they all flooded into my head at once. This was a Bigfoot. There was no other explanation that fit. And in that moment, every campfire story, every dismissed news segment, every joke, it all became terrifyingly real. I knew I couldn't stay there. I had to get back to the house. The idea of turning my back on it was unthinkable. So I decided to back away, slowly, one careful step at a time. I remember shifting my weight, my boots making almost no sound on the soft, leafy ground. I took one step back, then another. My eyes were locked on that dark shape under the tree. It remained perfectly still. It was like a statue, this massive living statue of something that shouldn't exist. The distance between us felt both vast and infinitesimally small. 60 yards is nothing for a creature that size. I was maybe 10 feet back from where I'd been standing when it happened. My heel came down on a dead branch I hadn't seen. The sound wasn't loud, not a dramatic crack, but a dull, wet snap. In the stillness of the woods, it sounded like a gunshot to me. I froze solid, my breath caught in my throat, every muscle in my body tensed, waiting for the reaction. My finger was hovering near the trigger guard of my rifle, but my arms felt like lead. This was it. This was the moment it would stand up, turn its head and look right at me. But it didn't. Nothing happened. The creature under the tree didn't so much as twitch. It didn't stir. It didn't lift its head. It just remained in that same slumped sitting position, completely oblivious or completely unconcerned. The silence that followed the snap of that branch was somehow more terrifying than any roar could have been. The anticipation of violence is often worse than the violence itself. That's when the real fear set in, the kind that makes your skin feel tight and cold, the kind that empties your head of all thought except one. Get out of here. Now. I stopped trying to be quiet. I turned around and started walking back the way I came, fast. I didn't run. Running felt like an admission of preyness, like it would trigger a chase. But I walked with a speed and purpose I didn't know I had. I didn't look back. I couldn't. The feeling of being watched was so intense, it was like a physical pressure between my shoulder blades. I expected to hear the sound of something massive crashing through the underbrush behind me at any second. The half-mile walk back to my house felt like 10 miles. Every shadow in the woods looked like a moving shape. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I felt dizzy. I kept my rifle in both hands now, held tight, my knuckles white. I didn't see any more dark figures. I didn't hear any screams or howls. There was just the normal sounds of the forest, which now sounded like a taunt. When I finally broke through the tree line and saw my house, a simple one-story white frame house, it was like seeing a mirage. I practically sprinted across the yard, up the porch steps, and slammed the door behind me. I locked it, then went and checked all the other doors and windows, my hands shaking so bad I could barely turn the deadbolts. I stood in my living room, breathing hard, listening. Nothing, just the hum of the refrigerator. My wife was in the kitchen. She took one look at me and asked what was wrong. I must have been pale as a ghost. I tried to tell her. The words came out in a jumble. Saw something by the big oak, huge thing, sitting like a person. Wasn't a bear. She gave me this look, a mixture of concern and skepticism. Probably just a bear, honey. You know how the light plays tricks out there in the shadows. My son, who's in his 20s and was visiting, just laughed and said I'd been watching too many YouTube videos. They didn't believe me. I could see it in their eyes. They thought I'd spooked myself. The more I tried to describe it, the size, the posture, the non-bear-like face, the crazier I sounded, even to myself. So I stopped talking about it. I just said, yeah, maybe it was a bear, and poured myself a strong drink. But I couldn't let it go. The image was burned into my mind. Later that evening, as the sun was starting to set, I got my courage up again. I took my rifle, got in my truck, and drove down the dirt road that skirts the edge of that part of the property. I didn't get out. I just stopped the truck where I had a view of that big oak tree from a couple 100 yards away. I got out my binoculars and glassed the area. The spot under the tree was empty. Of course it was. The woods were quiet and still in the golden evening light. I almost didn't do it, but I had to know. I drove the truck as close as I could, then got out and walked the rest of the way to the oak tree, my rifle ready. My mouth was dry and my heart was back to that heavy, frightened pounding. When I got there was nothing, no creature, no sign of a struggle. But there was one thing. The grass and ferns directly under the tree, right where it had been sitting, was slightly flattened, not smashed down, not like a bed, just pressed, like something very heavy had been resting there for a while. I knelt down and looked at it. There were no footprints that I could see. The ground was too hard and covered in leaves. Just that one patch of slightly flattened grass. That was it. That was the only physical proof. A patch of grass that was a little flatter than the grass around it. I stood up and looked around at the darkening woods. I felt a profound, deep-seated unease. I was being watched again. I couldn't see anything, couldn't hear anything, but the feeling was so strong it was almost a smell in the air. Something had been here. Something that didn't belong in my world was here, on my land, and then it was just gone. I got back in my truck and went home. I didn't sleep well that night. I don't sleep all that well most nights now. I'm more cautious when I go out on the property. I scan the tree lines. I listen for sounds that don't fit. I never walk that southern trail without my rifle, and I never, ever go out near dusk. My family still thinks I saw a bear. Sometimes I almost convince myself that's what it was, just to make the fear go away. But then I remember the way it was sitting, the sheer size of it, the shape of its head. I remember the absolute primal terror of those 2 minutes when I stood there frozen, knowing exactly what I was looking at. And I remember the silence after I stepped on that branch, a silence that felt more like a warning than a relief. It was here, and then it was gone, and I have no way to explain any of it. Story 12. This happened back in September 2012. I was up in the Bitterroot Range, way out in western Montana. I've been hunting since I was a kid, mostly bow hunting for elk and deer, and I know those mountains like the back of my hand. That particular ridge, I'd scouted it half a dozen times over the years. It's steep, thick with lodgepole pine and Douglas fir, and there's a creek that cuts through the bottom that usually has good sign. I'd set out early that morning, maybe around 6, just as the sun was starting to light up the eastern slopes. The air was crisp, the kind of cold that bites at your lungs but feels good when you're moving. I had my bow, a compound I'd been using for years, and a pack with some water, snacks, and basic gear. Nothing fancy. I remember thinking it was going to be a good day. The weather was clear, no wind to speak of. And I'd seen some fresh elk tracks on the way up. I was focused, in that zone where you're just listening and watching, every little sound meaning something. I'd been sitting on a fallen log for about an hour, waiting for something to move, when I started hearing noises off to my left. At first I figured it was an elk or maybe a black bear. They're common enough out there. The sounds were heavy, like something big was pushing through the underbrush. But it wasn't the usual rhythm of an animal grazing. It was more deliberate, almost methodical. I shifted slowly, trying to get a better look without making noise. The trees were dense, so I couldn't see much, but the sounds kept coming. Then I caught movement through the gaps in the pines, something dark and massive, way bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. My heart started thumping hard in my chest, not from fear yet, but from curiosity. I thought, maybe it's a moose, but moose don't usually tear at trees like that. I edged closer, using the cover of a thick fir tree, and that's when I saw it clearly. It was standing maybe 50 yards away, and I swear to God, it was over 8 feet tall, covered in dark, matted hair that looked almost black in the shadows. It had these broad shoulders and long arms, and it was using its hands, human-like hands with thick fingers, to rip bark off a pine tree, not just scratching at it, but tearing big chunks away, like it was peeling it back. The power in those movements was insane. I could hear the wood splintering from where I was. I froze, my mind racing. What the hell is that? I'd heard stories, Bigfoot or Sasquatch or whatever, but I always brushed them off as nonsense. But there it was, real as anything. Then it stopped. It turned its head slowly, and I saw its face, not clearly because of the distance and the shadows, but enough to see it had dark eyes and a heavy brow. It was looking right at me. Time just stopped. I felt this cold wave wash over me, like I'd been dunked in ice water. My breath caught in my throat and I couldn't move. For a second, we just stared at each other, and I knew it knew I was there. Then it let out this roar. I've never heard anything like it. It wasn't like a bear's growl or anything animal I know. It was deafening, deep and guttural, and it echoed through the trees like a shockwave. My ears rang, and I felt it in my bones. That's when it charged. It didn't hesitate. It just came at me, crashing through the brush like it was nothing. Branches snapped and the ground shook under its weight. I didn't think. I just ran. I dropped my bow. I didn't even realize I'd let go of it until later, and my pack slipped off my shoulders as I bolted down the slope. The terrain was steep and uneven, covered in loose rocks and deadfall, and I was stumbling, barely keeping my feet under me. My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it would burst out of my chest. Every breath felt like a knife in my lungs, and I could hear it behind me, that roaring mixed with the sound of it plowing through everything in its path. I glanced back once, and I wish I hadn't. It was gaining on me, moving faster than anything that big should be able to. Its arms were swinging, and I could see the muscles bunching under that dark fur. The smell hit me then, this musky, earthy stench, like wet dog and rotten leaves, so strong it made my eyes water. I veered to the right, heading for the creek I knew was at the bottom of the ridge. My only thought was to get to the water, maybe cross it and lose it in the thicker woods on the other side. But I was terrified, my legs feeling like jelly, and I kept tripping over roots and rocks. Somehow I made it to the creek. I splashed into the shallow water, my boots soaking instantly, and scrambled up the far bank. I turned around, panting, expecting it to be right on top of me, but it had stopped at the edge of the creek, on the side I'd just left. It stood there, maybe 20 feet away, and it was still growling, this low, rumbling sound that vibrated through the air. Its chest was heaving, and I could see its breath misting in the cold air. It didn't cross the water, just stood there, watching me with those dark eyes. I was frozen again, unable to look away. The intelligence in its gaze. It wasn't just an animal. It felt like it was sizing me up, like it knew exactly what I was and what I was doing there. We stayed like that for what felt like forever, but it was probably only a minute or two. Then, without another sound, it turned and melted back into the trees. One moment it was there, the next it was gone. like it had never been. The woods went silent, except for the sound of the creek bubbling and my own ragged breathing. I didn't move for a long time. I just stood there shaking, my clothes soaked with sweat and creek water. The fear was so deep I felt sick to my stomach. After a while, when I was sure it wasn't coming back, I forced myself to move. I knew I had to get out of there, but I also needed to see what was left. I crossed the creek again, my legs wobbly, and retraced my steps up the slope. It was harder going back. Every noise made me jump, and I kept expecting to see it again. When I got to where I'd first seen it, I found my bow and pack lying on the ground. My hands were trembling so bad I could barely pick them up. Then I saw the tree, the one it had been tearing at. The bark was gouged out in deep, ragged strips, like something had dug into it with incredible force. The wood underneath was exposed, raw and pale. I ran my hand over it, and the splinters were sharp. Nearby, the ground was torn up from where it had charged, and I saw footprints, huge footprints, nearly 18 inches long, pressed deep into the soil. They weren't like bear tracks. They were more human-shaped, with a clear arch and toes, but way bigger than any human foot. I followed them for a bit, and they led to where it had stood by the creek. The branches on the bushes around were shattered, snapped clean off in some places, like something massive had forced its way through. I spent maybe another hour there, just looking at all of it, trying to make sense of what happened. But I couldn't. As an experienced hunter, I've been in scary situations, come face to face with bears, gotten lost in storms, but nothing like this. I'd always been the hunter, you know, in control, but that day I felt hunted. Like I was prey, the way it charged, the way it watched me. It wasn't random, it felt purposeful, almost aggressive, in a way that wasn't just animal instinct. I packed up my gear and hiked out as fast as I could. The whole way back to my truck, I kept looking over my shoulder, expecting to see it following me, but I didn't see or hear anything else. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone. What would I say? That I saw Bigfoot. They'd think I'd lost it, but I've never been able to shake that feeling. I've never gone back to that ridge, not even to scout. Sometimes at night I'll wake up from a dream about those eyes, or that roar, and I'll be sweating and shaking all over again. I don't know what it was. Maybe it was a bear, maybe something else, but I know what I saw, and I know how it made me feel. To this day, I can't explain it, and I doubt I ever will. Story 13. Okay, so this happened back in late March or early April of 2009. I remember it was one of those days where everything felt normal, you know? Just another evening drive home. I was heading south on GA 75 between Helen and Cleveland in Georgia. It was around 6:15 in the evening, and the sun was starting to dip behind the trees, casting long shadows across the road. I'd been driving for about 20 minutes, just cruising along with the radio on low, some classic rock station playing in the background. The air was cool but not cold, that kind of spring chill that makes you roll up the windows halfway. I was in my old Ford pickup, the one with the dent in the passenger door from where I'd clipped a mailbox a few years back. The seat was worn out, and I could feel every bump in the road. My mind was mostly on getting home. I'd been helping a friend move some furniture earlier, and I was tired, just wanted to grab a beer and crash on the couch. The road here is pretty winding, with thick woods on both sides, mostly pines and oaks. And every now and then you'll pass a field or a driveway leading off to some hidden house. It's not heavily trafficked, but there were a few cars around, enough that I had to pay attention. As I came around a bend, I saw something on the east shoulder up ahead. At first, I thought it was just a person, maybe someone in a weird costume or something. You see all sorts of things out here, hunters, hikers, kids messing around. But this was different. It was crouched down, kind of hunched over, and I figured it was someone looking for something in the grass. I slowed down a bit, not too much, just enough to get a better look. My foot eased off the gas, and the truck decelerated, the engine humming softer. Then it stood up. I swear my heart just dropped into my stomach. It wasn't a person, it was tall, really tall. I'd guess between 6'2" and 6'4", and it was covered in this fur, medium to light brown, with a kind of sheen to it, like it was wet or oily. The fur wasn't matted or messy, it looked almost clean, if that makes sense. It moved smoothly, not jerky like a person in a suit would. It just rose up, and for a second, I thought maybe it was a bear, but bears don't stand that straight and they're bulkier. This thing was leaner, more built like a person, but bigger, way bigger. It turned its head slowly, and that's when our eyes met. I'll never forget that moment. It felt like everything froze, the road, the trees, the sound of my engine, everything. Its eyes were dark, but they had this intelligence, not like a human's, not angry or scared, just aware. It reminded me of how dolphins look, you know, like they're taking everything in, understanding it. There was no malice, no aggression, just this calm, knowing gaze. It was looking right at me, and I felt this jolt go through my body like I'd been shocked. My hands tightened on the steering wheel, and I could feel my pulse thumping in my neck. I was breathing fast, shallow breaths, and my skin got all cold and prickly. It didn't run or snarl or anything. It just held my gaze for what felt like forever, but was probably only a couple of seconds. Then it pivoted, turned its whole body smoothly, and walked into the woods. Not rushed, not panicked, just a calm, deliberate walk, like it had somewhere to be and wasn't bothered by me. It disappeared into the trees, and I swear the way it moved was so quiet, like it didn't make a sound. No crunching leaves, no snapping twigs, nothing. I wanted to stop. God, I wanted to pull over and see if I could find it, but I couldn't. There was traffic behind me, a car or two, and the shoulder was blocked by these big hay bales someone had left there. I remember seeing them out of the corner of my eye, stacked up along the edge of the road, so I had to keep going. My mind was racing, trying to process what I'd just seen. Was it a person? No, no way. The height, the fur, the way it moved. It wasn't human. It wasn't a bear or a deer or anything I'd ever seen before. I felt this deep, gut-level fear, but also curiosity, like I needed to know what it was. I drove for another minute or two, my hands shaking so bad I had to grip the wheel tighter. I kept glancing in the rear-view mirror, half expecting to see it following me or something, but there was nothing. The woods just looked dark and empty. I finally found a spot to pull over a little ways down, where the shoulder widened out. I stopped the truck, killed the engine, and just sat there for a minute. My heart was still pounding, and I could feel sweat on my forehead, even though it was cool outside. I took a few deep breaths, trying to calm down, but it wasn't working. I got out of the truck, my legs feeling wobbly, and walked back toward where I'd seen it. The air smelled like pine and damp earth, and the light was fading fast, turning everything gray and shadowy. I didn't have a flashlight or anything, just my phone, but the battery was low. I made my way to the spot on the shoulder, near where the hay bales were. The grass was trampled a bit, but that could have been from anything. Animals, people, who knows. I looked into the woods, peering between the trees, but it was too dark to see much. I called out, "Hello?" But my voice sounded weak, and there was no answer. Just the rustle of leaves in the wind. I stood there for what felt like a long time, just staring into the woods, hoping to catch a glimpse of movement or something. But there was nothing. It was like it had vanished into thin air. The woods felt different now, heavier, like they were hiding something. I've always been comfortable in the woods, grown up around here, spent hours hiking and camping, but in that moment, I felt like an outsider, like I didn't belong there. It was a creepy feeling, like being watched, even though I couldn't see anything. I eventually gave up and went back to my truck. I drove home the rest of the way in a daze, not really paying attention to the road. My mind kept replaying that moment, the way it stood up, the look in its eyes. It wasn't scary in a monster movie way. It was scarier because it felt real, like I'd seen something that wasn't supposed to exist. When I got home, I didn't tell anyone at first. What would I say? Hey, I saw Bigfoot on GA 75. They'd think I was crazy. I just sat on my couch, staring at the wall, trying to make sense of it. Over the next few days, I went back to that spot a couple of times during the day to look around. I didn't find any footprints or fur or anything like that. The ground was soft in places, but there were too many marks from deer and other animals. I talked to a few people eventually, cautiously, asking if they'd ever seen anything weird out there. Most of them laughed it off, but one guy, an older hunter, said he'd heard stories but never seen anything himself. That kind of made me feel a little less alone, but not much. That encounter changed how I see the woods now. Before, I thought of them as peaceful, a place to unwind. Now every time I'm out there, I get this uneasy feeling like I'm being watched. I can't shake the memory of those eyes, that intelligence. It wasn't some dumb animal. It was aware, conscious in a way I can't explain. I've never seen it again, and part of me hopes I never do. But another part wonders what it was, what it wanted. I still drive that road sometimes, and every time I pass that spot, my heart speeds up a little. I look into the trees, half expecting to see it again. But I never do. It's just gone like it was never there, but I know what I saw, and it's stuck with me ever since. Story 14. It was one of those humid Georgia evenings in late August, the air so thick you could almost chew it. The day had been long, just me and my son coming back from a weekend visiting my sister over in Macon. He was 13, all knees and elbows, slumped in the passenger seat with his headphones on, but he'd taken them off a while back to complain about being hungry. Old Carterville Road was our shortcut, a way to shave 20 minutes off the trip to get him a burger sooner. I'd taken this road 100 times, maybe more. It was just a narrow strip of cracked asphalt winding through pine forests, so deep and dark, they felt like a different world once the sun started going down. The headlights of my Ford pickup cut a weak path through the deepening twilight. The trees crowded right up to the edge of the road, their branches looking like skeletal arms in the periphery. I had the window down a crack, and the smell of hot pine needles and damp earth filled the cab. My son, he was fiddling with the radio, trying to find a station that wasn't just static or preaching. It was all so normal, so boringly routine. I was thinking about work the next day, about the weird noise the truck had started making, about whether I remembered to take the trash out before we left. Just the mundane junk that fills your head on a long drive home. That's when I saw it. Up ahead, maybe 100 yards, something was on the side of the road. My first thought, the automatic one, was bear. We get black bears around here, not a lot, but enough that you see them sometimes. They'll rummage through garbage cans, look at you with those dumb, curious eyes before waddling off. This one looked big for a bear, though, and it was just standing there, hunched over, its back to us. I let my foot off the gas, not a brake slam, just a gentle coasting slowdown. "Look, a bear," I said to my son, mostly to break the monotony. He perked up, leaning forward to peer through the windshield. As we got closer, the details started to come into focus, and that's when the first little cold finger of wrongness traced a line down my spine. The fur wasn't right. It wasn't the shaggy, messy coat of a bear. This was coarse, like thick horsehair, and it was a jet black that seemed to swallow the light from my headlights, and it was big. I mean, the bulk of it was just immense, way bigger than any bear I'd ever seen. Then it moved. It didn't turn. It straightened. My breath hitched in my throat. It uncurled from its crouch in one fluid, powerful motion, rising up and up and up. It just kept getting taller. It must have been over 8 feet tall, easy. Its shoulders were unbelievably broad, like a powerlifter's, and even through the matted black hair, you could see the muscles bulging and shifting across its back and arms. They were defined, like a bodybuilder's, but covered in that thick animal hair. It was built all wrong, a nightmare mix of man and beast. In its hand, and it was a hand I could see long, thick fingers, it was holding something white. At the time, my brain, scrambling for any kind of sense, just registered it as a bag or a rag. It was only later I realized it must have been a chicken, a white leghorn from one of the coops scattered out in these woods. It was standing fully upright now, and it took a step. Not a lurch, not a clumsy animal walk. It walked. Its gait was balanced, purposeful, almost human, but with a raw, primal power in every movement that was anything but human. It was heading for the tree line, angling away from the road, like it was annoyed by the headlights, but not panicked. My truck had almost rolled to a stop. I was just frozen, my hands glued to the steering wheel at 10 and 2, like I was back in driver's ed. I could feel my heart hammering against my ribs, a frantic, painful thumping. My mouth had gone completely dry. "Dad," my son said, his voice small and tight. "What is that?" I didn't have an answer. My mind was screaming, throwing out words and dismissing them just as fast. Bear. No, man in a suit. Absolutely not. Nothing made sense. The sheer size of it, the way it moved, the aura of raw, ancient strength that seemed to vibrate off of it. It was impossible. On a dumb impulse, my thumb found the fog light button on the dashboard. I clicked it. The extra set of lights, lower and wider, flared out, illuminating the ditch and the base of the trees. The creature reacted instantly. It wasn't an annoyed shuffle anymore. The second those fog lights hit it, its whole body tensed. Its head, which I still hadn't gotten a clear look at, twitched slightly. And then it ran. It didn't just bolt, it exploded into motion. The power was staggering. Its thigh muscles, like tree trunks wrapped in that black hair, bunched and flexed, driving it forward. It covered the 20 or so feet to the tree line in 2, maybe 3 strides. It was fast, unnaturally fast. The kind of speed you see in a nature documentary about cheetahs, not something that huge and heavy on 2 legs. It moved with a low, ground-eating gait, its arms pumping, and it vanished into the wall of dark pines without a sound. No cracking branches, no rustling leaves. It was just there 1 second, and then the darkness had swallowed it whole. The silence that followed was heavier and more terrifying than the sight of it had been. The only sound was the rough idle of my truck engine and my own ragged breathing. And then it got worse. Just before it had disappeared, in that split second when it launched itself into its run, it turned its upper body back toward the road. I saw its face. Or I didn't see a face. I saw a glimpse, a shadowy impression. In the fraction of a second the headlights caught it. It was dark, leathery. I didn't see eyes, just deep-set shadows. But I felt its attention. I felt a wave of something so old and so alien wash over me. It wasn't curiosity, it wasn't aggression. It was a kind of assessment, a cold, intelligent acknowledgement of our presence. That was the real horror moment. The size was frightening, the speed was terrifying, but that brief turn, that feeling of being seen by something that was not supposed to exist, that's what hollowed me out. That's the feeling that still wakes me up at night. My son was gripping the dashboard, his knuckles white. "Dad." "What was that?" he whispered, his voice trembling. I couldn't speak. I just stared at the empty space where it had been. My hands were shaking so badly I had to clutch the steering wheel to steady them. A cold sweat had broken out all over my body, soaking through my t-shirt. The normal sounds of the forest, the crickets, the frogs, they were all gone. It was a dead, suffocating silence. "Get your phone," I managed to croak out. "Take a picture." He fumbled for his phone, his hands shaking as badly as mine. He pointed it at the woods, but it was useless. The screen just showed a pitch-black rectangle. The flash wouldn't have reached 10 feet. We had nothing, no proof. Just the 2 of us, sitting in a truck on a dark road, our reality permanently fractured. I finally forced my foot onto the gas pedal. The truck lurched forward. I didn't gun it, I just drove, my eyes glued to the tree line on my side, then my son's side, then the rearview mirror. Every shadow was a threat. Every rustle of a leaf in the light breeze made me jump. I was expecting it to burst out of the woods, to keep pace with the truck, to reach out a massive, hairy arm. We drove in total silence for what felt like an hour, but was probably only 5 minutes. My mind was racing, trying to process it. Bigfoot, Sasquatch. I'd heard the stories, seen the blurry videos on TV. I'd always laughed it off. It was campfire stuff for tourists and weirdos. But what I just saw, there was no other box to put it in. It wasn't a bear. It wasn't a man. It was something else, something that lived in these deep woods and didn't want to be seen. We finally saw the glow of the lights from Highway 61 up ahead. The relief was physical, a wave of nausea and weakness. I pulled out onto the highway, merging into the sparse traffic, the normalcy of other cars, their headlights, the yellow lines on the road. It all felt like a bizarre dream. We stopped at the first burger place we saw. We went through the drive-thru. I don't even remember what I ordered. We sat in the parking lot eating, not saying a word. The food tasted like cardboard. I kept looking out the window, half expecting to see that massive, dark shape standing at the edge of the parking lot, watching us. My son finally put his half-eaten burger down. It was real, wasn't it, Dad? I looked at him, at the fear and awe in his young eyes, and I knew I couldn't lie to him. I couldn't give him some comforting, rational explanation. There wasn't one. "Yeah, son," I said, my voice still unsteady. It was real. We drove the rest of the way home in silence. When we pulled into the driveway, the house was dark and quiet. We got out, and both of us instinctively looked back toward the woods that border our property. They seemed different now. They weren't just trees anymore. They were a hiding place. I called my buddy, a deputy with the county sheriff's office, the next day. I didn't say what I saw. I just asked casually if there'd been any reports of strange animals or anything out on Old Carterville Road. He laughed and said the only thing strange out there were the meth cooks, and they didn't get that big. I didn't push it. What was I going to say? What was I? A few days later, driving home from work, I took a different route that looped me back to a section of Old Carterville Road, a few miles from where we saw it. I don't know why. I guess I had to see it in the daylight. I pulled over near the spot. The ditch was just a ditch. The trees were just trees. But then I saw it, lying in the weeds near the edge of the asphalt, a handful of pure white feathers scattered around. And a few feet away, a single faint, enormous footprint pressed into the soft mud at the ditch's bottom. It was blurred at the edges, but it was long, way longer than my own boot, and broad. I didn't have a camera. I didn't have a cast-making kit. I just stood there and looked at it. This piece of evidence that would turn to mud and be gone with the next rain. I never went back to that spot. My son and I, we don't talk about it much. Sometimes he'll give me a look, and I'll know he's thinking about it. I see it every time I close my eyes. Not the running, not the size, but that moment it turned. That quiet, intelligent assessment from the shadows. I was driving on a road I knew like the back of my hand, thinking about trash and engine noises, and for about 10 seconds, the world peeled back and showed me something underneath it, something old and powerful and secret. And then it was gone. Just like that, and I was left with a memory that doesn't fit, a story nobody would believe, and the chilling absolute certainty that we are not alone in these woods. We never have been. Story 15. The school was a cluster of old buildings, tucked right up against the woods. My trailer was parked near the main dorm, close enough that I could see the back door from my kitchen window. That night, a Tuesday, I'd done my final bed check just after 11. All the kids were down, the place was locked up, and I was settling in with a book, thinking I'd read for an hour before turning in myself. I must have dozed off in my chair, because the next thing I knew, I was jerking awake. The digital clock on my microwave said it was 12:17 in the morning. Something had woken me up. I sat there for a second, just listening. At first, there was nothing, just the usual creaks and sighs of an old trailer settling in the cold. But then I heard it, a sound from outside. Not a small sound either. It was a clatter, metal on metal, followed by a heavy, dragging sort of noise. It was coming from the direction of the big industrial trash cans we had behind the kitchen. We'd had problems with bears before. They'd come down from the hills, looking for an easy meal, and those trash cans were a magnet for them. A big black bear could make a hell of a racket trying to get the lids off. I sighed, annoyed. The last thing I wanted to do was go out into the cold and scare off a bear. But I had to. If it managed to tip a can over and spread garbage everywhere, I'd be the one cleaning it up at 6 in the morning. I pulled on my boots, not even bothering to tie them, and grabbed my heavy Maglite flashlight. I didn't own a gun, never saw the need. For a bear, making noise was usually enough. I stepped out of my trailer, and the cold hit me like a wall. It was that crisp, sharp cold you only get in the mountains, the kind that makes the air feel thin. My breath plumed out in front of me in the beam of my flashlight. I swung the light toward the trash cans, which were about 50 feet away, past a small stand of pine trees. I could see one of the big plastic lids was on the ground. Something was definitely back there. I could hear it, a wet, crunching sound, the sound of something eating. "Hey!" I yelled, my voice sounding thin and small in the vast quiet of the night. "Get out of here!" The crunching stopped, but whatever it was didn't run. I could see a dark, hulking shape behind the cans, mostly hidden in the deep shadows cast by the pine trees. It was big, really big. I felt a little prickle of unease. This wasn't a raccoon or a coyote. I took a few steps closer, staying on the gravel path. "Go on! Scram!" I shouted again, more forcefully this time. It didn't move. It just stayed there, a massive dark lump. I was getting pissed off now. I was tired, it was freezing, and I didn't have time for this. I bent down and scooped up a couple of decent-sized rocks from the edge of the path. I've done this a dozen times. You chuck a rock near a bear, it gets startled and lumbers off into the woods. Simple. I hurled the first rock. It was a good throw. It arced through the beam of my flashlight and hit the metal side of the trash can with a loud bang! The effect was not what I expected. The dark shape didn't startle, it didn't run, it just stopped. The crunching sound ceased completely. An absolute profound silence fell over the clearing. It was a silence that felt heavy, like a weight pressing down on my ears. My own breathing suddenly seemed too loud. Then the shape moved. It didn't turn around. It just began to rise. It uncurled from its crouch behind the trash cans and just kept rising. It was slow and deliberate and utterly horrifying. My brain, which had been so sure it was a bear, short-circuited. A bear stands on its hind legs, sure, but it's clumsy, it's front-heavy. This thing rose with a terrifying, fluid grace. It kept rising until it was fully upright, and it was enormous. I'm 6 feet tall. This thing had to be close to 10 feet, maybe more. It was just a towering silhouette against the darker black of the trees, but the sheer size of it made my legs feel weak. It was massively broad across the shoulders, with arms that hung down too long, ending in hands I couldn't really see. It was covered in what looked like dark, shaggy hair, but it wasn't fluffy like a bear's coat. It was stringy, almost wet-looking. I was frozen. My arm, which had been ready to throw the second rock, just dropped to my side. The rock fell from my numb fingers and thudded on the gravel. I couldn't process what I was seeing. My mind was screaming, "Bear, it's a bear." But every instinct in my body was screaming something else, something much, much older and more primal. Then it took a step toward me. It wasn't a lumbering walk. It was a step, a single ground-shaking step that brought it out from behind the trash cans and into the dim moonlight. And that's when I saw its eyes. They glowed. It wasn't a reflection of my flashlight because my light was pointed at its chest, illuminating a matted, filthy pelt. Its eyes glowed with their own faint reddish-orange light, like two dying embers stuck in the sockets of a skull. They were set deep under a heavy, sloping brow, and they were fixed directly on me. I felt a cold sweat break out all over my body, under my clothes. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might crack them. This was wrong. All of this was wrong. Between me and the thing was the old suspension bridge that crossed over a shallow, rocky creek. The creek separated the main campus from the staff housing and my trailer. The bridge was maybe 60 feet long, just wooden planks and steel cables, and it swayed a little when you walked on it. It was the only way back to my trailer without wading through the icy water. The creature took another step, and then another, its movements eerily silent for something so huge. It was heading for the near end of the bridge. It was going to cross. That broke my paralysis. A jolt of pure, undiluted terror shot through me. I turned and I ran. Not toward the school, not toward the dorms where the kids were sleeping, because that would mean running toward it or parallel to it. I ran for the other end of the bridge. My trailer was on the other side. My trailer meant safety, a locked door, 4 walls. My untied boots slapped against the wooden planks of the bridge as I hit it at a full sprint. The whole structure started to sway and bounce under my feet. The cables groaned. I could hear my own ragged, panicked breaths, and underneath that another sound, a heavy, rhythmic thump, thump, thump. I dared a glance over my shoulder, almost losing my balance as the bridge swayed. It was on the bridge. It was walking across the bridge toward me. It didn't seem bothered by the swaying at all. It moved with a powerful, deliberate stride, its long arms swinging slightly at its sides. Those glowing eyes were locked on me, unwavering. It was covering the distance faster than I was. Its strides were twice as long as mine. I was only halfway across. I wasn't going to make it. It was going to reach me before I got to the other side. The thought was so clear and so terrifying that a sound, a half sob, half scream, ripped out of my throat. I couldn't outrun it. I was trapped on this stupid, shaking bridge with this thing. Pure, blind panic took over. I stopped running. I turned to face it, my back against the bridge's cable railing. It was maybe 20 feet away now, still coming. I could smell it. Oh God, the smell. It hit me like a physical blow. It was a rank, overpowering stench of rot, of old meat, of wet fur and something else. Something foul and musky that I can't even describe. It was the smell of a carcass that's been left in the sun for a week. It made my eyes water and my stomach lurch. I had nothing, no weapon, just this stupid, heavy flashlight. I raised it, my hands shaking so badly the beam of light jittered all over the creature's torso. "Get back!" I screamed. My voice was high and shrill, cracking with terror. "Get away from me!" It didn't even flinch. It kept coming. 15 feet 10. Its size was just overwhelming up close. It blocked out the world behind it. I was going to die, I was sure of it. I don't know why I did it. It wasn't a thought. It was a last, desperate act of a cornered animal. I stomped my foot down on the wooden plank as hard as I could. Bam! The whole bridge shuddered. At the same time, I put every last ounce of air in my lungs into a raw, wordless shout. It wasn't a word. It was just a noise, a primal roar of pure fear and defiance. The creature stopped. It was only 5 or 6 feet away from me. It just stopped dead. Its head tilted slightly to the side, those glowing ember eyes studying me. The silence stretched for a heartbeat. 2. The only sound was the frantic metallic rattle of the bridge cables as they settled. Then it moved. It didn't step back. It didn't turn around. In one fluid, impossible motion, it planted a hand on the cable railing to its left and simply vaulted over the side of the bridge. I stood there, stunned. My brain couldn't keep up. 1 second it was there, a mountain of stinking fur and muscle. The next it was gone. Just gone. The bridge was still swaying from the force of its movement. I stumbled to the railing and looked over, expecting to see it splashing in the creek bed 8 feet below. There was nothing. The creek bed was empty, just rocks and a trickle of water glittering in my flashlight beam. No splash, no sound of crashing through the undergrowth on the other side. Nothing. It had vanished. I didn't wait. I didn't think. I spun around and ran the rest of the way across the bridge, my legs feeling like rubber. I didn't look back. I hit the gravel on the other side, sprinted the last 20 yards to my trailer, fumbled with the keys, my hands shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the lock. I finally got the door open, fell inside, and slammed it shut, throwing the deadbolt. I stood there in the dark, my back against the door, gasping for air. I was drenched in sweat and freezing cold at the same time. I could still smell it. That god-awful stench was in my nose, in my hair, on my clothes. I started to gag, stumbling to the sink and dry heaving, but nothing came up. I stayed like that for a long time, maybe an hour, just listening. Every tiny noise from outside made me jump. The wind in the trees sounded like footsteps. The creak of my trailer sounded like the groan of the bridge cables. I was terrified that those glowing eyes would appear at my window. I finally forced myself to turn on a light. I looked at my hands. They were still trembling. I looked at my boots, still untied. I looked at myself in the small mirror over the sink. My face was pale, my eyes wide with a fear I'd never known before. I never saw it again. I went out the next morning when the sun was fully up, my heart in my throat, armed with a kitchen knife. There were no footprints by the trash cans. The ground was too hard and rocky. There were no footprints under the bridge either, just my own from when I'd run across it. There was no evidence at all, nothing to prove what I'd seen. But I know what I saw. It wasn't a bear. A bear doesn't stand 10 feet tall. A bear doesn't have glowing eyes. A bear doesn't move with that kind of silent, purposeful intelligence. A bear doesn't vanish into thin air. I quit that job 2 weeks later. I told them a family emergency had come up. I couldn't stay out there, not with those woods, not with that bridge. I still dream about it sometimes. I'm back on that bridge, feeling it sway, smelling that rotten stench, and seeing those 2 red-orange coals floating in the darkness, coming right for me. I wake up gasping, the sheets soaked with sweat, and it takes me a full minute to remember that I'm safe in my apartment in the city, hundreds of miles away. But in that minute, I can still smell it. Niches. Story 16. It was the summer of 1990, and I was 16 years old. That's important, I think, because when you're that age, you feel kind of invincible, or at least you think you're smarter than you are. Me and 5 of my friends from school had this idea that we were real outdoorsmen. We'd been camping before, sure, but always at designated spots with our families, with bathrooms and fire rings and park rangers driving by. This time, we wanted to do it for real. We talked our parents into it by lying, telling them we were going to a supervised scout campout. Instead, we packed my buddy's beat-up Chevy Blazer and headed deep into the woods north of Helen, Georgia, right near the Upper Chattahoochee River Recreation Area. We found a spot that felt miles from anywhere. It was a small clearing on a rise, surrounded by thick pine and poplar trees, with a steep ridge on one side. We got the tents up as the sun was going down, built a decent fire, and cooked the hot dogs we'd brought. The whole thing felt like a victory. We were laughing, joking around, feeling like we'd conquered the wilderness. The air got cool once the sun disappeared, and the sounds of the forest at night started up. Crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the rustle of something small in the leaves. It was all normal. It was all fine. The trouble started when the moon came up. It wasn't a full moon, but it was bright enough to cast shadows through the trees and light up the ridge across from our camp. We were just sitting around the fire, talking about nothing, when one of the guys, Tim, went quiet. He was just staring past the fire towards the ridge. "What is that?" he said, his voice low and flat. We all turned to look. At first I didn't see anything, just the dark outline of the ridge against the slightly less dark sky. Then I saw it, a shape. It was big and just wrong. It was part of the tree line, but it was thicker and taller than any of the pines. It was just a black silhouette in the moonlight, but you could tell it was a shape that didn't belong. It was hunched over, massive shoulders, and it was just standing there. We all froze. The joking stopped. The fire didn't feel warm anymore. We were whispering, "Is that a bear? It's too tall for a bear. Maybe it's a stump." But it wasn't a stump. We'd been looking at that ridge all evening. There was no stump there. Then it moved. It didn't turn or shuffle. It just stood up. It uncoiled from that hunched position and rose to its full height, and my stomach dropped out of me. It was huge. I mean, unbelievably, terrifyingly huge. The ridge was maybe a couple 100 yards away, and this thing towered over the trees at the crest. The moonlight outlined it perfectly now, a massive, broad-shouldered bipedal shape. It didn't look like a man. The proportions were all wrong. The arms were too long. The head seemed set directly on the shoulders without much of a neck. We were dead silent. I could hear my own heart hammering in my ears. I could feel the cold sweat on my back, a complete contrast to the heat from the fire on my face, and then it jumped. I don't know how else to describe it. It didn't run and leap. It was standing on the ridge, and then it was in the air. It launched itself from that ridge, across a gully that had to be at least 30, 40 feet wide, and it landed somewhere in the trees on the other side. And the whole thing was completely silent. No grunt of effort, no crash of branches, no sound of a heavy landing, just this impossible, fluid, silent motion. 1 second it was there, a monstrous cutout against the moonlit sky, and the next second it was just gone. The silence that followed was worse than the sight of it. For a full 5 seconds, nobody said a word. We were just staring at the empty space where it had been. Then the panic hit us all at once. It wasn't a loud panic. It was a cold, deep, gut-level terror that made our voices thin and shaky. We gotta go. Now. Right now. What was that? We didn't even discuss it. We didn't pack the tents. We didn't put out the fire properly. We just grabbed our backpacks, threw them in the blazer, and piled in. Tim was fumbling with the keys, his hands shaking so bad he dropped them twice. The whole time, we were all staring out the windows, expecting that thing to come crashing out of the woods right next to us. The headlights felt pathetically small and weak, just 2 little cones of light in this vast, dark wilderness that had just shown us something it wasn't supposed to contain. The drive out was the longest of my life. Every shadow was that thing. Every tree trunk was its leg. We didn't talk much. What was there to say? We'd all seen it. We knew we hadn't imagined it. We got back to town just as the sun was coming up, and we never really talked about it again. It was like an unspoken pact. We went our separate ways for college, for jobs, and that night became this weird, buried secret. 16 years later, in 2006, the memory of that night was still with me, but it had softened around the edges. I was in my 30s, working in agricultural marketing, which meant I spent a lot of time around farms, livestock and machinery. I had a pretty good eye for judging the size and weight of animals. I'd seen bulls that weighed a ton, tall draft horses, big stuff. That thing from 1990, in my mind, had to be at least 8 feet tall and 600 pounds. But it wasn't bulky like a bear or a bull. It was a different kind of build, leaner in the torso, but with those huge shoulders and long arms. It didn't match the Patterson film thing, which always looked kind of stooped and awkward to me. This thing moved with a powerful, fluid grace that was chilling. My dad, a lifelong skeptic, knew the story. He'd always laughed it off. "A bear on its hind legs, son. You kids spooked yourselves." He was visiting me that fall, and on a whim, I suggested we go for a drive up to Helen, do a little hiking. I didn't tell him my real plan. I wanted to see if I could even find that old campsite. It took most of the day, and I'm not even totally sure it was the exact spot, but it felt right. The ridge was there. The clearing was smaller, grown over with new saplings. We decided to just have a late lunch there, a little picnic. My dad was in a good mood, enjoying the crisp autumn air. I was feeling tense, my eyes constantly scanning the tree line, that old fear simmering just under the surface. We'd been there for maybe 20 minutes when the smell hit me. It's hard to describe a smell, but I'll try. It was a mix of things. It was like rotten meat, but not exactly. It was sweet, in a sickly, nauseating way, and underneath that, there was a pungent, musky odor, like a wet dog that had been rolling in something dead, multiplied by 100. It was so strong, it made my eyes water. I gagged. "You smell that?" I asked my dad. He sniffed the air, and his face contorted. "Woo-wee, yeah. Something died around here recently. A deer, probably. Smells awful." But it didn't just smell like death. It smelled alive. It was an active, pungent stench that seemed to hang in the air like a cloud. We tried to ignore it and finished our sandwiches, but the smell just got worse. Like whatever was causing it was getting closer. After we ate, my dad said he was going to take a leak and wandered off towards the thicker trees at the edge of the clearing. I started packing up our stuff. A few minutes later, he called out to me, his voice tight. "Hey, come here. Look at this." I walked over to where he was standing, and my blood went cold. Our campsite, or what we were using as a campsite, had been ransacked, but we hadn't left anything out. Our cooler was closed, our backpacks were with me. This was something else. A small, rocky depression we'd been sitting near was torn up. A rotten log that had been there was splintered into pieces, not broken by age, but ripped apart. The moss and leaves were scuffed and dug up in long, deep gouges, like something huge had been rooting around, looking for grubs or something. But it wasn't neat. It was violent. It looked angry, and then I saw the sapling. It was a young tree, maybe 10 feet tall and 2 inches thick. It wasn't broken, it was twisted. The trunk was spiraled like someone had taken the top and just wrung it out like a wet towel. The bark was shredded where the force had been applied, and the whole thing was bent over at a 45-degree angle. The green wood inside was exposed, dripping sap. That wasn't an animal. A bear might bite it or break it in half, but it wouldn't methodically twist the entire trunk into a corkscrew. That takes a terrifying amount of strength and a grip I don't even want to think about. My dad, the skeptic, was just staring at it, his mouth slightly open. He reached out and touched the shredded bark. "What in God's name could do that?" he whispered. He looked at me, and for the first time, there was no trace of a smile on his face. There was just confusion and a dawning, uneasy fear. A bear didn't do this. That's when the woods went quiet. The bird song, the insects, the little rustling noises, they all just stopped. It was the same kind of silence from 16 years ago, a dead, heavy silence that feels like a physical weight on your ears. The only sound was the faint rustle of the very tops of the trees in the wind. The smell was overwhelming now, that rotten, sweet musk stench filling my nose and my lungs. We both stood there, frozen, listening. My heart was doing that same frantic pounding from when I was 16. I could feel the hair on my arms standing up. I looked at my dad, and his eyes were wide, scanning the dense wall of trees around us. He looked old in that moment and scared. Then from maybe 50 yards away, deep in the thickest part of the woods, we heard it. A sound. It wasn't a growl, it wasn't a roar, it was a low, guttural vibration, more felt than heard. It was a deep huff, huff sound, like the exhale of something with massive lungs. It was slow and deliberate, and with each huff, the smell seemed to get stronger, wafting towards us on the breeze. We didn't say a word. We didn't need to. My dad's hand shot out and grabbed my arm, his grip like a vice. We started backing away, never turning our backs to the trees. We moved slowly at first, then faster, our eyes locked on the spot where the sound was coming from. I couldn't see anything, just shadows within shadows, but I could feel it. I could feel something looking back at us. We backed all the way to the car, which was parked on a dirt track about 100 yards away. The whole time that low, rhythmic huffing continued, never getting louder, never getting closer, but never stopping either. It was just there, a constant reminder that we were being watched. We got in the car. I fumbled with the keys, just like Tim had all those years ago. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely get the key in the ignition. I started the engine, slammed it into reverse, and spun the tires, kicking up dirt and gravel as I pulled away. I didn't stop until we were back on paved road. We drove for 10 minutes in complete silence. Then my dad, his voice quiet and hoarse, said, "I believe you now." That was it. That was all he said. We never talked about it again after that day. He passed away a few years later, and I never brought it up. But I know what we saw, or at least I know what we experienced. I saw its shape in the moonlight in 1990, and in 2006 I saw its work. I smelled its stench, and I heard its breath in the dark. I work with big animals. I know their scale, their strength. What I saw on that ridge was bigger and stronger than anything that's supposed to be walking around in the woods of Georgia. The silence of its jump is what haunts me the most, something that big shouldn't be able to move without making a sound. But it did, and sometimes, late at night, I'll catch a weird smell on the wind, or I'll hear a branch snap outside my window, and my heart will just stop for a second. I'll be 16 years old again, staring at a moonlit ridge, watching a silhouette stand up and vanish into the night without a sound. And I'll remember that the woods are a lot bigger and a lot darker than we like to think. Interesting. Story 17. Itomat. It was one of those late October afternoons where the sky just decides to give up early. Must have been around 4:30, but it felt later. The way the light was already fading, turning everything this dull grey colour. Me and my buddy were in his beat-up Ford F-150, heading west on County Road Southwest in Wells Township. We'd been out near the Huron National Forest most of the day, just messing around, and we were taking the back way home toward County Road 557. It's a route we'd driven 100 times. You know those roads up there, paved, but just barely, winding through thick woods on both sides, so close you could reach out and touch the pine needles if you were dumb enough to try. The radio was on low, some classic rock station fighting through static, and we weren't talking much, just tired, you know? The kind of comfortable silence you have with a friend where you don't need to fill the air. I was slumped in the passenger seat, watching the trees blur past, my mind just blank. It was so normal. That's the part that gets me now. How utterly, completely normal everything was right up until it wasn't. We came around this gentle left-hand curve. The road dips a little there before it starts to climb again. The trees on the right side are a solid wall of dark green, a mix of pine and cedar so thick you can't see 10 feet into them, and that's where it came from. It didn't step out. It emerged, like the forest itself just decided to stand up and walk. 1 second the road was empty. The next, this thing was just there, already in the middle of the asphalt. My friend, he didn't even have time to yell. His foot just slammed on the brake pedal so hard, my seatbelt locked and choked the air out of me. The tires screeched, this horrible sound that tore through the quiet. The truck skidded, the back end fishtailing a little on the damp pavement. We came to a stop maybe 50, 60 feet from where it had been. My brain couldn't process it at first. It was like looking at a picture that was all wrong. The proportions were off. It was tall. So goddamn tall. I'm not good at judging height, but if I had to guess, it was at least 9, maybe 10 feet. Its head was huge, not round, but blocky, sitting on these massive rounded shoulders that looked like they were made of solid muscle. It was covered head to toe in this shaggy, dark brown hair, almost black in the fading light. It wasn't like a bear's fur. It was longer, stringier. It was already moving across the road from our right to our left, and it didn't run. It didn't lope. It took one step, one single huge, powerful step. Its legs were long, and it just strode. Its arms swung, and they were long too, hanging down past its knees. The head was tilted forward a bit, like it was looking down at the road, but I got this sickening feeling it knew we were there. The whole thing took maybe 2 seconds. From the time it appeared to the time it vanished into the trees on the left side of the road, it was 2, maybe 3 heartbeats. It moved with this effortless, fluid power that was terrifying. It wasn't clumsy, it wasn't stumbling, it was purposeful and unbelievably fast. The truck was still rocking from the sudden stop. The engine was running, and that stupid rock song was still playing on the radio. I could smell the burnt rubber from the tires, a sharp, acrid scent that filled the cab. My heart wasn't just beating fast, it was slamming against my ribs, a frantic, painful hammering that made it hard to breathe. My hands were gripping the dashboard, my knuckles white. I could feel the cold, hard plastic under my fingertips, the little ridges and textures I'd never noticed before. We both just stared. We stared at the empty spot on the road where it had been. The air in the cab was thick, heavy. I could hear my friend breathing next to me. These short, ragged gasps. I realized I was holding my breath and let it out in a rush. "What the hell was that?" I finally managed to say. My voice didn't sound like my own. It was thin and shaky. My friend didn't answer. He was just staring straight ahead, his hands locked on the steering wheel at 10 and 2, his knuckles just as white as mine. His face had lost all its color. He looked like he'd seen a ghost. No, a ghost would have been better. This was solid. This was real. "Did you see that?" I asked, my voice rising. "Did you see it?" He just gave a tiny, stiff nod, his eyes still glued to the road. I turned my head, looking out my passenger window toward the woods on the left. The trees were just as thick over there, dark, impenetrable. There was no movement, no sound. It had just been absorbed, swallowed whole by the forest. It was gone like it had never been there at all. That's when the full-body chill hit me. It started at the base of my spine, a cold wave that rushed up my back and over my scalp. My skin prickled everywhere, a million tiny needles. I felt suddenly, overwhelmingly nauseous. My mouth was dry as dust. "We should stop," I heard myself say. We should go look for tracks, something." My friend shook his head, a quick, jerky motion. "No," that was all he said, just no. His voice was a low croak. He didn't put the truck in park. He didn't turn it off. His foot was still on the brake, and he was just sitting there, frozen. I could see the pulse hammering in his neck. I looked back at the woods. The shadows between the trees seemed deeper now, darker. Every little movement, a branch swaying in the wind, a leaf falling, made my heart jump. My mind was racing, trying to fit what I'd seen into a box I understood. A bear? No. No way. The way it walked upright, the sheer size of it, the length of the arms, the shape of the head and shoulders. It was all wrong for a bear, a person in a costume. Out here, in the middle of nowhere, Michigan, and moving like that, crossing a 20-foot wide road in one step. It was impossible. It was absolutely, undeniably impossible. The silence between us stretched. It wasn't comfortable anymore. It was heavy, suffocating. The only sounds were the rough idle of the truck engine and that faint, staticky radio. I reached over and turned the radio off. The sudden quiet was even worse. "We saw that, right?" I whispered. "We both saw the same thing?" He finally turned his head to look at me. His eyes were wide, full of a raw, primal fear I'd never seen in another person before. It was a look that said he'd just had the entire world he understood ripped out from under him. "Yeah," he breathed out. "We saw it." He didn't say anything else. He just slowly, carefully moved his foot from the brake to the gas. The truck crept forward. We were probably going 5 miles an hour. Both of us were scanning the woods on the left, our heads on a swivel. The trees looked normal. Just trees. But they didn't feel normal. They felt like a curtain, and behind that curtain was something that shouldn't exist. As we passed the exact spot where it had crossed, I leaned forward, staring down at the asphalt. It was just wet pavement, a few fallen leaves. I don't know what I expected to see. A giant footprint in the tar. There was nothing. It had left no trace. My friend sped up a little, not much, but we were maybe doing 20 now. The woods on the left started to thin out, giving way to a swampy area. I kept expecting to see it again, to see it standing at the tree line, watching us. My neck was stiff from craning it to look back. I couldn't stop. I had to keep watching. The feeling in the truck was unbearable. It was pure, undiluted dread. I felt exposed. The cab of the pickup felt as flimsy as tissue paper. I had this irrational thought that if it wanted to, that thing could just reach out and peel the roof back like a tin can. We drove for another 10 minutes in total silence before we reached the intersection with County Road 557. He turned right toward town, and finally he pushed the speed up to the limit. It was only then that I realized I'd been holding my body so tense that my shoulders and back ached. I looked over at him. He was still pale, his jaw clenched so tight I could see the muscle twitching. He kept checking the rearview mirror, his eyes flicking up every few seconds. "You okay?" I asked, even though it was a stupid question. He shook his head again. "No." We didn't talk about what we'd seen. Not then. What was there to say? We both knew. There was no debate, no, maybe it was this, maybe it was that. Our brains had short-circuited because the only thing that fit, the only thing that made any sense with what our eyes had recorded, was the thing you're not supposed to believe in, the thing from stories and blurry videos. Bigfoot. The word hung in the air between us, unspoken but louder than anything else. The rest of the drive home is a blur. The familiar houses, the streetlights coming on, it all looked alien and wrong. The world had shifted on its axis, and everything felt different. When he dropped me off at my place, he just nodded at me. I got out and he drove off without another word. I stood there on my driveway for a long time, just staring at the dark line of trees at the edge of my property. The wind felt colder. Every little night sound, a dog barking in the distance, the creak of a tree, made me flinch. I went inside and locked the door, something I hardly ever did. I checked all the windows. I couldn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw it. That massive, dark form emerging from the trees. That single ground-eating step, the way it just disappeared. The image is burned into my brain. The sheer size of it, the way it moved with this impossible silent power. I've gone over it 1,000 times in my head. I've looked at pictures of bears, of moose, of every large animal in North America. Nothing comes close. The proportions were all wrong. The height, the arm length, the head and shoulder structure. It was bipedal, it was huge, and it was covered in hair. We never went back to look for tracks. My friend refused to ever talk about it again after that night. I tried to bring it up once a few weeks later, and he just shut down, changed the subject. I think it scared him too deeply. It scared me too, but in a different way. It left me with this hollow, unsettled feeling that's never really gone away. Because the thing is, it didn't feel like an animal. It didn't act like one. It didn't bolt across the road in a panic. It just crossed like it had somewhere to be. And the most terrifying part, the part that still gives me chills when I think about it, was that it never once looked at us. It just did its thing and was gone. We were irrelevant. We were just two guys in a truck who happened to be there when it decided to cross the road. And that's it. That's what happened that day on County Road Southwest. I saw something I can't explain, something that shouldn't exist, and my friend saw it too. We didn't get a picture, we didn't get any proof. All we got was this memory, this gut-deep certainty, and a fear of the woods that I'll probably carry with me for the rest of my life. I still drive that road sometimes, when I have to. And every single time I come around that left-hand curve, my heart starts to pound, and my hands get sweaty on the wheel. I always slow down, and I always look into the trees. Story 18. That first day was perfect. I remember the specific smell of the cedars we pitched our tent under, this sharp, clean scent that mixed with the damp earth. We'd fished off the shore of the lake, didn't catch much, but it didn't matter. We built a campfire, cooked some burgers, and just talked, the three of us. Scout was in heaven, sniffing every bush, chasing squirrels, his tail a constant happy metronome. He was a good-sized mutt, part German shepherd, part who knows what, tough and loyal. We felt safe with him around. We went to bed that night feeling that good kind of tired, the kind you get from fresh air and simple things. I was dead asleep when Melissa's hand clamped onto my arm. Her grip was so tight it hurt. "Ryan," she whispered, her voice thin and stretched. "Listen." I held my breath. At first, there was nothing but the usual night sounds. The faint sigh of wind in the high branches, a distant owl. Then I heard it, a low rhythmic crunch, crunch, crunch. Not like an animal walking. Slower, heavier. It was the sound of something big stepping deliberately on the dry undergrowth, snapping twigs under a weight I couldn't even guess at. It was close, maybe 20-30 feet from the tent, just beyond the ring of our dead fire. My heart immediately started hammering against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat of pure adrenaline. I fumbled for the heavy-duty flashlight we kept by the air mattress. My hands were shaking so bad, I almost dropped it. Probably just a moose, I whispered to Melissa, trying to sound like I believed it. But I'd heard moose before. This was different. This had an intelligence to the rhythm, a purpose. Scoot was up now, a low guttural growl rumbling in his chest. The hair on his back was standing straight up. He wasn't barking yet, just that warning growl, the kind he'd only ever made once before when a black bear had wandered too close to our backyard. The crunching stopped. The silence that followed was worse. It was a listening silence. I could feel Melissa trembling next to me. I had to see, I had to know what was out there. I gripped the flashlight, my palms slick with sweat. "Stay here," I breathed, and I started to unzip the tent flap. The sound of the zipper was obscenely loud in the quiet. It was like screaming, "I'm here." The second the flap opened a few inches, Scout exploded. He wasn't just barking, it was a full-on hysterical attack bark. He shoved past my legs, a black and tan blur, and launched himself into the darkness toward the source of the sound. "Scout, no!" I yelled, scrambling out of the tent after him, shining the light wildly. I'll never forget the sequence of sounds that came next. They're burned into me. First, a tremendous crash, like a small tree being snapped in half. Then, a single sharp yelp from Scout, a sound of pure surprise and impact. It was cut off instantly, and then the screams. They weren't barks, they weren't growls, they were screams, high-pitched, agonized, mortal screams from my dog. The kind of sound you only make when your body is being destroyed. It was the most horrifying sound I have ever heard in my life. It didn't sound animal, it sounded human in its sheer raw agony. I swung the flashlight beam toward the screams, my own breath caught in my throat, my body frozen solid with a terror so complete it felt like I'd been dipped in ice. The light landed on it. It was towering. I'm 6 feet tall, and this thing had to be 8 feet easy, maybe more. It was crouched over, but its shoulders were massive, slumped, and powerful. It was covered in dark hair, almost black, but in the flashlight beam, it looked wet, like it had been swimming or was sweating. It was holding Scout. My dog, my tough 50-pound dog, was just hanging limp in one of its huge dark hands, like a rag doll. And then it turned its head. The eyes, oh God, the eyes. They weren't reflecting the light like a deer's or a cat's. They glowed, this deep, hellish red, like two burning coals set deep in a face I couldn't really make out. There was no whites, no pupils, just 2 points of malevolent red light staring right at me from the shadows of its face. Time stopped. I couldn't move, I couldn't scream. I just stood there, flashlight shaking in my hand, locked in that red gaze. It felt like an hour, but it was probably 2 seconds. Then it moved. It didn't run. It just vanished. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, melting back into the trees with a speed that made no sense for something that size. It was just gone. But the sound didn't stop. From the darkness where it had disappeared, we heard it. Wet, tearing sounds. A deep, rhythmic crunching noise, like bones being splintered between powerful jaws. A soft, ripping sound, then a loud crunch, then another rip, another crunch. It was eating him. It was standing right there in the trees, maybe 40 feet away, and it was eating our dog. The smell hit us then. I'd been too terrified to notice it before. It was a rank, musky odor, like a wet dog that had been rolling in rot and old piss. It was thick and heavy, coating the back of my throat, making me want to gag. It was the smell of that thing. Melissa was out of the tent now, clinging to my arm, her face buried in my shoulder, sobbing silently. We just stood there, rooted to the spot, listening to our dog being torn apart. We listened to every second of it, the wet rips, the grisly crunches, the sound of something swallowing. It felt like it went on for an eternity, but when I tried to piece it together, it was probably less than a minute, a long, brutal, horrifying minute where we were forced to be an audience to our pet's murder, and then, as suddenly as it started, it stopped. The forest was silent again. The owl had stopped hooting. The wind had died down. The only sound was Melissa's choked sobs and the frantic thumping of my own heart in my ears. We didn't move. We didn't speak. We just stood there, clutching each other, staring into the blackness, waiting for those red eyes to reappear. The smell still hung in the air, a vile reminder. I kept the flashlight pointed at the trees, my finger cramping from how hard I was gripping it. We stood like that for what felt like hours, until the first faint hint of grey began to lighten the eastern sky. The moment there was enough light to see by, we moved. We were both shaking, operating on pure, terrified autopilot. We didn't even speak. We just started throwing everything into the car. The tent, the sleeping bags, the cooler, all of it just crammed in any which way. We didn't care about folding things. We just wanted to be gone. As I was yanking the last tent peg out of the ground, my eyes fell on the spot where it had happened. The ground was torn up. There were deep, obvious scuff marks in the pine needles and dirt. And there, scattered around, were pieces of Scout, a tuft of his fur matted with something dark, a piece of his red collar shredded, and worse things. Things I don't want to describe. It was all just scattered, not like a predator had eaten its kill, like it had been torn apart for the sake of it, and leading away from the site into the thicker woods were footprints. They were huge, I mean massive. I wear a size 12 boot, and I placed my foot next to one of the prints. It was easily half again as long and twice as wide. The print was deep, sunk into the soft earth, showing an incredible weight. It was vaguely human-shaped, but the toes were long, and the whole thing was just wrong. We got in the car. I turned the key, and the engine roaring to life was the most beautiful sound I'd ever heard. We peeled out of that campsite, gravel spraying, and didn't stop until we got to the ranger station on the main road. The ranger, an older guy with a weathered face, listened to us. We were a mess, pale, shaking, talking over each other. When I got to the part about the red eyes and the size of the thing, his expression changed. It wasn't disbelief. It was a grim, weary recognition. He didn't say much. He just took our statement, nodding slowly. When I was done, he looked at me and said, "You're not the first folks to have an experience like that out near Priest Lake. Unexplained attacks, mostly on pets and livestock. We don't have an answer for it." We drove home to Sandpoint in complete silence. The joy of the previous day was a distant, mocking memory. We never went camping again. We sold all our gear online the next week. A few months later, we sold our house on the edge of town and moved into a small apartment right in the center of Sandpoint, surrounded by neighbors and streetlights. Melissa had nightmares for a year. She'd wake up screaming, drenched in sweat, smelling that awful musk. She still can't talk about it. And me? I think about it all the time. Not just the horror of it, but the deliberateness. It didn't just kill Scout for food. It made us watch. It made us listen. It let me see its eyes. It wanted us to know it was there. It wanted us to know we were in its world and that our safety was an illusion it could shatter whenever it wanted. It wasn't a hunt. It was a message of pure, terrifying dominance. And to this day, I have no idea what it was or why it chose us, and I never will. I just know it's out there. Story 19. It was the summer between 7th and 8th grade, and I was at Camp Bradley up north of Redfish Lake in Idaho. A big boys' scout camp, the kind with hundreds of kids spread out in different troops. Our troop was different. All 6 of us were deaf. We had 2 hearing counselors, but for the most part, it was just us. A little bubble of silence in the middle of all that noisy wilderness. We communicated with our hands, our faces, our whole bodies. You learn to read the world differently when you can't hear it. You watch the way leaves move, the way shadows shift. You feel vibrations through the ground. That's important for later. This was a Tuesday, I think. Yeah, definitely a Tuesday. We'd been there for 4 days already, and the routine was starting to feel a little boring. Morning flag ceremony, merit badge classes, lunch, more classes, dinner, campfire. We were supposed to stick to the main camp areas and the well-marked trails. The camp rangers, they gave us this whole talk on the first day about not wandering off. They said the woods were dense, it was easy to get lost, and there were bears. They made the sign for bear, clawing their hands near their chest, and we all nodded like we understood. But what they were really saying, with their serious eyes and their pointed fingers, was, "Stay where we can see you." That afternoon, we had a break, a couple of hours of free time. Our counselors were off doing some kind of meeting with the other adult leaders. It was just us 6, sitting around on logs near our campsite, bored out of our minds. The sun was hot, but under the trees it was cool. The air smelled like pine needles and dirt. I remember tracing patterns in the dust with my shoe. It was my friend, I won't use his name, just my friend, who got the idea. He was always the one pushing the limits. He started signing fast and excited. Let's go explore. Beyond the boundary markers, to the 3rd lake. The camp was on the 1st lake. There was a 2nd lake a mile or so away that was okay for hiking to, but the 3rd lake was off limits. It was farther, less visited, and supposedly harder to get to. The forbidden fruit. We all looked at each other. Our eyes did the talking, a series of raised eyebrows, slight nods, and hesitant shrugs. The universal language of teenagers deciding to do something stupid. We were all thinking the same thing. What are they going to do? Send us home? We're already here. And it was just a lake. How dangerous could it be? So we went. We just got up and started walking, single file, down a trail that led away from the main hub of the camp. We passed the sign that said "Trail ends, do not proceed," and just kept going. The feeling was electric. It was that little thrill of rebellion. The world got quieter, or, well, my version of quiet became more intense. The forest closed in around us. The trees were bigger here, older. The sunlight came down in thick shafts, lighting up patches of ferns and moss on the forest floor. The trail was narrow, just a worn strip of dirt barely wide enough for one person. We were signing as we walked, the person in front turning their head slightly to see the person behind them. We were talking about stupid kid stuff, video games, a stupid teacher from school, what we thought was in the lunches they were going to serve that night. We'd been walking for maybe 45 minutes. The trail started to climb a little, a gentle uphill slope. We were all a bit out of breath, but feeling good, proud of ourselves for making it this far. I was second in line. My friend was in front of me. I was watching his hands as he signed something about his older brother, and then he stopped. His hands froze in midair. His whole body went rigid. My eyes snapped up from his hands to look past him, down the trail, about 75 feet ahead, where the trail curved slightly to the right. Something came out of the trees on the left. It crossed the trail. It didn't run. It didn't lurch. It walked, upright, on 2 legs. My brain short-circuited. It tried to file what I was seeing into a known category. A bear? No. Bears don't walk like that. A man in a fur coat? Absolutely not. This was wrong. It was all wrong. It was huge. I'm not good at estimating height, but you know how tall a basketball hoop is? 10 feet? This thing was close to that. 8 feet tall at least. Maybe more. Its shoulders were impossibly broad, like a refrigerator wearing a fur coat, and it was covered in hair. Not fur like a bear, but long, shaggy hair, dark brown, almost black in the shadows of the trees. It moved with a speed and agility that made no sense for its size. It wasn't clumsy. It was fluid, powerful. Each step it took covered so much ground. It was like watching a video on fast forward. The most chilling part was its silence. For us, the world is always silent, but this was a different kind of silence. A bear makes the ground shake. A deer rustles leaves. This thing moved through the world without disturbing it. It was just there, and then it was gone, vanishing into the thick undergrowth on the right side of the trail. The whole thing lasted maybe 3 seconds, 4 at most. Time didn't just stop, it shattered. I was frozen. I couldn't move my legs. I couldn't even move my eyes. I was just staring at the empty space where it had been. My heart wasn't beating in my chest. It was trying to punch its way out through my ribs. My mouth was dry. My tongue stuck to the roof of my mouth. I felt cold, a deep internal cold that had nothing to do with the temperature. Slowly, very slowly, I managed to turn my head to look at my friend in front of me. He was still frozen, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated terror. His eyes were wide, his jaw slack. I looked behind me. The third guy in line, he had seen it too. He had the same look, a shared, silent nightmare. The other 3 scouts behind him hadn't seen it. They were bumping into each other, confused. They were signing, "What? What is it? What's wrong?" My friend in front finally moved. He turned around, his movements jerky and unnatural. His hands were shaking so badly he could barely form the signs. "Did you see that?" He signed, his eyes wild. I just nodded. I couldn't make my hands work. The third guy nodded too, a quick, frantic bob of his head. "See what?" The others signed, their faces a mix of confusion and annoyance. "A bear?" We both shook our heads violently. "No, not a bear." We started trying to explain, our signs messy and overlapping. Big, tall, walking, 2 legs, hair, fast. They didn't get it. They thought we were messing with them. They started to get pissed off. One of them signed, "Stop joking around," and tried to push past us. That's when my friend in front lost it. He grabbed the guy's arm. His grip must have been insanely tight because the guy winced, the look on his face. It wasn't anger, it was raw, primal fear. He pointed down the trail, then back at his own eyes, then made a slashing motion across his throat. I saw it. It was real. Shut up. They saw our fear then. They really saw it. It's one thing to think your friends are playing a prank. It's another thing to see genuine, soul-shaking terror on their faces. The joking stopped. The air got heavy. The 6 of us stood there on that narrow trail, a tight little knot of panic in the vast, silent forest. An argument started, but it was a quiet, frantic argument of flying hands and strained faces. "We have to go back. We have to see what it was." "Are you crazy?" "It's gone." What if it's not? The curiosity, mixed with the terror, was a sickening feeling. The part of my brain that was still a Boy Scout, still an explorer, was screaming that we had just seen something incredible. The part of my brain that was a scared kid was screaming that we needed to run and never stop. The curiosity won, or maybe the fear was so great that we felt we had to confront it, to prove to ourselves it was real. We decided together to move forward, but not like before. Now we moved as one tight group, shoulder to shoulder, our eyes scanning every shadow, every tree. The forest, which had felt peaceful and exciting just minutes before, was now a place of infinite hiding spots. Every stump looked like a crouching figure. Every dark patch between trees felt like a doorway something could step out of. We walked slowly, so slowly, toward the spot where it had crossed. The 75 feet felt like a mile. My senses were on a knife's edge. I was noticing everything. The way the pine needles felt soft under my feet. The smell of damp earth. The slight breeze on my skin. I was hyper-aware of my own body, of the fact that I was a soft, fragile thing in a world that had just shown me it contained monsters. We reached the spot. There was nothing there, just the trail, the trees, the ferns. We looked into the meadow where it had disappeared. The grass was tall, maybe waist-high on an adult. We stood at the edge, peering in. We expected to see something. Tracks. A broken branch. Some kind of sign. But there was nothing. The grass was undisturbed. It was as if the thing had simply dissolved into the air. That was almost worse than seeing it. The lack of evidence made it feel more like a hallucination, a shared dream. But we knew what we saw. The image was burned into the back of my eyelids, the sheer size of it, the way it moved. That wasn't a dream. We stood there for what felt like a long time, just staring into that empty meadow. The bravado was gone. The curiosity was gone. All that was left was a deep, cold dread. We all turned at the same time, a silent agreement passing between us. We had to get out of there. The hike back was a nightmare. We didn't walk. We power-walked, almost a jog, constantly looking over our shoulders. Every snap of a twig, which I couldn't hear but I could see the others flinch at, made my heart leap into my throat. We didn't sign, we didn't communicate at all, we just moved, a single terrified organism fleeing through the woods. The friendly sun-dappled trail had become a dark tunnel we needed to escape. We burst out of the trees and back into the main camp area. The noise and the sight of other people was a shock. It felt like stepping out of a black and white horror movie and into full color. We must have looked a mess, because one of the counselors saw us and immediately came over, his face concerned. He started talking, his mouth moving fast. We were all trying to sign at once, our stories jumbling together. Big creature in the woods, walking. He couldn't understand us. He thought we'd seen a bear. He kept making the bear sign, trying to calm us down. We were shaking our heads, frustrated, desperate to make him understand it was something else. But how do you explain something like that? The words don't exist. We just kept signing big and tall and not a bear. He eventually just herded us back to our campsite, gave us some water, and told us to sit down and relax. He thought we'd just gotten spooked. We sat there on our logs, not talking, just staring into the trees at the edge of our camp. The world had fundamentally changed. It felt thinner, like a fragile skin over something ancient and wild and terrifying. Later that night, after dinner, we were sitting near the campfire pit. The camp caretaker, an older guy with a big bushy grey beard who'd been working there for years, was making the rounds, checking on the firewood. He saw us sitting there, quiet and withdrawn, and he came over. He knew some sign language, basic stuff. He signed, "You okay? You look spooked." One of my friends signed back slowly, "We saw something. In the woods, by the third lake." The caretaker's face changed. The friendly, casual expression vanished. He got very still. He looked at each of us, his eyes serious. He didn't ask if it was a bear. He just nodded slowly, like he'd been expecting this. Then he signed, two simple words that sent a fresh chill straight down my spine. Bigfoot. He then pointed to his own eyes and then out toward the dark woods. I have seen it too. He didn't tell us a long story. He didn't need to. Those two words and the look of absolute certainty on his face were all the confirmation we would ever get. It solidified everything. We hadn't imagined it. We hadn't seen a bear. We had encountered something else. Something that lived in the stories of that place. Something real. We never went back into those deep woods. We stuck to the main trails for the rest of the week. I didn't sleep well for a long time after I got home. Even now, years later, if I'm in a quiet forest and I see a shadow move out of the corner of my eye, my heart still seizes up for a second. I never saw it again. I never heard any sounds. But I know what I saw that Tuesday afternoon on a narrow trail north of Redfish Lake. I saw something walk on two legs that wasn't a man. And sometimes, in the dead of night, that's still enough to scare the hell out of me.